The Servitor stands as one of humanity's most enduring technological achievements, though its origins stretch back into the mists of the dark age of technology, that golden epoch when mankind reached heights of scientific mastery never since equaled. During this era, the integration of biological tissue with mechanical components represented merely one avenue among countless technological marvels. The earliest servitors emerged not from theological conviction, but from practical necessity, humans modified to interface directly with machinery, their neural tissue repurposed to control complex systems with an efficiency no cogitator alone could match. These proto-servitors operated mining equipment on distant worlds, maintained atmospheric processors on colony vessels, and performed countless tasks where human intuition combined with mechanical precision proved invaluable. The fall changed everything. As the age of strife tore through human civilization, the warp storms that isolated Terra from its far-flung colonies severed the technological networks that had sustained humanity's golden age. Knowledge fragmented, and much of humanity's scientific understanding vanished into the darkness. On Mars, however, the tech clans who would eventually coalesce into the Mechanicum preserved fragments of this lost knowledge. Among the ancient data repositories and half-functional manufactorums, they discovered the principles of servitor creation, though the theological framework through which they interpreted this technology differed radically from its original secular application. The Mechanicum did not simply rediscover servitors, they reconceptualized them entirely. Where the ancients had seen tools, the priests of Mars perceived holy implements of the machine god's will. The process of servitor creation became ritualized, each step accompanied by prayers and invocations. The tech priests studied the fragmentary standard template construct data they possessed, reverse engineering the biomechanical integration processes while simultaneously developing the religious doctrine that would justify and sanctify these practices. By the time the Emperor's forces reached Mars during the Unification Wars, the Mechanicum had already established servitors as fundamental to their technological and theological framework. The cult Mechanicus built its entire philosophy around the inherent weakness of unmodified flesh. To the tech priests, the human body represented an imperfect vessel, prone to failure, disease, and the corruption of emotion. The machine, by contrast, embodied perfection, eternal, logical, and pure. Servitors occupied a unique position in this theological landscape. They were neither wholly flesh nor entirely machine, but rather a synthesis that purified the weakness of biological matter through sacred union with blessed mechanisms. A servitor's lobotomized brain, stripped of higher cognitive functions and reprogrammed for specific tasks, demonstrated the triumph of the machine over the chaotic inefficiency of human consciousness. This theological justification extended beyond mere practicality. The tech priests viewed servitor creation as an act of redemption, transforming flawed biological matter into something approaching the divine perfection of the machine. The process involved extensive surgery, the installation of mind impulse units, and the careful calibration of neural pathways to ensure optimal performance. Chemical treatments and psychosurgery reduced the servitor's consciousness to the bare minimum required for its designated function. What remained was a being that existed in a state the Mechanicum considered blessed, free from doubt, fear, ambition, or any of the countless weaknesses that plagued unaugmented humanity. The Omnissiah's doctrine, as interpreted by the Fabricator General and the High Priests of Mars, provided explicit guidance on the sources of biological material for servitor creation. Criminals sentenced to death found their punishment commuted to servitorization, their bodies repurposed to serve the Imperium they had wronged. Workers who failed in their duties, particularly those whose negligence resulted in damage to sacred machinery, faced similar fates. The vat-grown also supplied material, cloned bodies produced specifically for conversion, their brains never fully developed beyond the basic structures necessary for servitor function. This practice eliminated any ethical concerns about destroying a fully formed human consciousness, though such concerns held little weight in Mechanicum theology regardless. The Treaty of Olympus Mons, negotiated between the Emperor and the Mechanicum during the final stages of the Unification Wars, formalized these practices throughout the nascent Imperium. The treaty granted the Mechanicum extensive autonomy in exchange for their technological support and military aid. Among its many provisions, the treaty explicitly recognized the Mechanicum's right to create servitors according to their established methods and to receive criminals and failed workers for conversion. This arrangement proved mutually beneficial. The Imperium gained access to Mars's manufacturing capacity and technical expertise, while the Mechanicum secured a steady supply of raw material for servitor production and maintained their theological independence. The treaty also established the legal framework that would govern servitor creation for the next 10 millennia. Forge worlds received the authority to demand tithes of criminals and failed workers from nearby imperial worlds. Planetary governors gained the power to sentence serious offenders to servitorization, a punishment considered more merciful than execution, yet more severe than any term of imprisonment. The Adeptus Archives incorporated servitorization into their judicial procedures, with specific crimes carrying mandatory conversion sentences. This system ensured that servitors remained abundant throughout the Imperium, their numbers sustained not by mass production alone, but by the constant flow of human material from imperial justice systems. Within the hierarchy of the machine god servants, servitors occupied the lowest tier, yet their position was neither simple nor without nuance. Tech priests themselves underwent extensive augmentation, replacing weak flesh with blessed machinery, but they retained their consciousness, their ability to reason, and their capacity to commune with the machine god through sacred rituals. A tech priest's augmentations enhanced their capabilities while preserving the spark of awareness that allowed them to serve as priests and interpreters of the Omnissiah's will. Their modifications represented a journey toward mechanical perfection, a gradual transcendence of biological limitations while maintaining the essential self. Skitarii, the military forces of the Mechanicum, similarly retained their core consciousness despite extensive augmentation. Their bodies bore combat modifications, reinforced skeletal structures, weapon integration, enhanced sensory systems, and neural accelerators that improved reaction times beyond human norms. Chemical treatments and conditioning programs suppressed fear and pain responses, creating soldiers of remarkable efficiency. Yet Skitarii remained thinking beings, capable of tactical analysis, independent action within their operational parameters, and devotion to the machine god that went beyond mere programming. They served as warriors, not tools, and the Mechanicum recognized this distinction in both practice and theology. Battle servitors represented a middle ground, more sophisticated than standard servitors, yet fundamentally different from Skitarii. These combat units received more extensive neural preservation, allowing them to process tactical information and respond to complex battlefield conditions. Their weapon systems integrated directly into their bodies, heavy bolters replacing arms, plasma cannons mounted on shoulder assemblies, power fists grafted where hands once existed. The Mechanicum deployed battle servitors in situations requiring heavy firepower without the risk of losing valuable Skitarii or tech priests. Their enhanced programming allowed for basic tactical responses, but they lacked the true autonomy of thinking combatants. A battle servitor could identify targets, assess threats, and execute combat protocols, but it could not question orders, adapt to truly novel situations, or experience anything resembling the warrior's spirit that drove Skitarii forces. Standard servitors fulfilled countless roles throughout the Imperium, their specific modifications determined by their intended function. Labor servitors possessed enhanced musculature and reinforced skeletal systems, their bodies rebuilt to lift massive weights and operate heavy machinery without fatigue. Technical servitors carried specialized tools integrated into their bodies, welding torches, drilling mechanisms, precision manipulators capable of working with components too small or delicate for unaugmented hands. Medical servitors assisted in surgical procedures, their multiple limbs allowing them to monitor vital signs, administer medications, and assist surgeons simultaneously. Domestic servitors maintained the households of wealthy imperial citizens, their programming focused on cleaning, maintenance, and basic service tasks. Each type of servitor underwent specific modifications suited to its role, but all shared common features. The Mind Impulse Unit formed the core of Servitor technology, a device that interfaced directly with the brain's motor cortex and sensory processing centers. This unit allowed servitors to receive commands through various means: verbal instructions, data pulse transmissions, or direct neural input from tech priests. The lobotomization process removed the portions of the brain associated with higher reasoning, emotion, and self-awareness, leaving only the structures necessary for basic function and task execution. Chemical regulators maintain the servitor's biological systems, preventing tissue rejection and managing the interface between organic and mechanical components. The transformation of a human being into a servitor begins in the sterile chambers of a mechanicum surgical facility, where tech priests gather to perform what they consider sacred work. The subject arrives restrained, conscious, or unconscious, depending on local procedures and the nature of their sentence. Vat-grown specimens require no restraint, their underdeveloped minds incapable of comprehending their fate. Criminals and penal converts often receive sedation, not from mercy, but to prevent physical struggle that might damage the biological material before processing begins. The tech priests perform their initial assessments with practiced efficiency, scanning the subject's neural architecture, measuring cranial capacity, and determining which portions of the brain will be preserved and which must be removed or suppressed. The lobotomization procedure itself represents the most critical phase of servitor creation. Tech priests approach the brain with precise tools, some mechanical and others bioelectric, designed to sever specific neural pathways while leaving others intact. The frontal lobes, responsible for personality, decision-making, and complex reasoning, receive the most extensive modification. Surgeons either remove these structures entirely or sever their connections to the rest of the brain, rendering them inert. The limbic system, which processes emotion and memory formation, undergoes similar treatment. Tech priests destroy or isolate the amygdala, hippocampus, and related structures, eliminating the subject's capacity for emotional response and preventing the formation of new memories beyond basic procedural learning. The motor cortex and cerebellum remain largely intact, as these structures control movement and coordination essential to servitor function. The brainstem continues operating without modification, maintaining basic autonomic functions like breathing and heartbeat. Sensory processing areas receive selective treatment. Visual and auditory centers remain functional to allow the servitor to perceive its environment, but the tech priests sever connections that would allow these sensations to generate emotional responses or complex interpretations. A servitor can see an injured human, but experiences no empathy, no distress, no recognition of suffering. It processes the visual information as raw data, nothing more. The surgery takes hours, sometimes days, for complex conversions. Tech priests work in rotating shifts, their own augmented bodies requiring less rest than baseline humans, but still needing periodic maintenance and recalibration. They employ a combination of techniques developed over millennia: laser scalpels that cauterize as they cut, neural dampeners that suppress specific brain regions without physical removal, and chemical agents that induce controlled cell death in targeted areas. The mechanicum's most skilled chirurgeons can preserve surprising amounts of neural tissue while still achieving complete lobotomization, creating servitors with enhanced processing capacity for complex tasks. Lesser practitioners often resort to cruder methods, removing entire brain sections with less precision but equal effectiveness in destroying the subject's consciousness. Once the lobotomization reaches completion, the augmentation phase begins. Tech priests remove the subject's skull cap, exposing the brain for the installation of the Mind Impulse Unit. This device, roughly the size of a human fist, consists of thousands of microscopic electrodes that penetrate the brain tissue at specific points. Each electrode connects to particular neural clusters, creating direct pathways for external control. The Mind Impulse Unit's central processor, a cogitator array no larger than a thumb, translates incoming commands into electrical impulses that the brain interprets as its own intentions. When a tech priest orders a servitor to lift an object, the servitor's brain receives signals identical to those it would generate if the action were its own decision. The servitor experiences no sense of compulsion or external control because it lacks the cognitive structures necessary to recognize such concepts. The installation process requires extraordinary precision. Each electrode must reach its designated neural cluster without damaging surrounding tissue or severing critical connections. Tech priests use specialized surgical servitors during this phase, their multiple limbs holding magnification lenses, positioning guides, and monitoring equipment, while the priest guides each electrode into place. The procedure resembles the tuning of a complex instrument, with the tech priest making minute adjustments based on electrical readings and neural response patterns. A properly installed mind impulse unit integrates so thoroughly with the brain that the servitor's biological and mechanical components function as a unified system. Poorly installed units result in servitors with limited functionality, prone to seizures or random motor activation. The mechanicum typically destroys such failures and recycles their components. Cerebral plugs emerge from the subject's skull at standardized locations, usually at the base of the skull and along the crown. These ports allow direct data transmission, enabling tech priests to upload new programming, adjust behavioral parameters, or diagnose malfunctions without invasive surgery. The plugs themselves are crafted from blessed metals treated to prevent tissue rejection, their surfaces etched with microscopic circuits that interface with the mind impulse unit. Different servitor types receive different plug configurations. Labor servitors might have 2 or 3 basic ports, while technical servitors require extensive arrays capable of receiving complex instruction sets and specialized programming for particular tasks. The replacement of organic components with mechanical systems follows established protocols that vary based on the servitor's intended function. Labor servitors undergo extensive modification of their musculoskeletal system. Tech priests remove arms and replace them with hydraulic limbs capable of exerting tremendous force without fatigue. These limbs connect directly to the servitor's nervous system through the mind impulse unit, allowing natural motor control despite their mechanical nature. The servitor's spine receives reinforcement with plasteel rods and support structures, preventing compression damage when lifting heavy loads. Leg modifications include reinforced joints and additional actuators that provide stability under extreme weight. Technical servitors receive more specialized augmentation. Their arms might be replaced with assemblies containing multiple tool limbs, welding torches, precision manipulators, cutting implements, and diagnostic sensors, all mounted on articulated frameworks. These tools connect to the servitor's sensory systems, providing feedback that allows delicate work despite the absence of true tactile sensation. The servitor's eyes often undergo replacement with augmented optical systems capable of magnification, thermal imaging, or spectrum analysis depending on their designated tasks. Some technical servitors receive additional processing capacity, supplementary cogitator units installed in their chest cavities to handle complex calculations or store extensive technical data. Medical servitors present unique challenges in their creation. These units require more preserved neural function than standard servitors, as medical procedures demand a degree of problem-solving and adaptability that purely programmed responses cannot provide. The lobotomization process for medical servitors removes emotional capacity and self-awareness while preserving portions of the brain associated with pattern recognition and procedural learning. The result is a servitor that can assist in surgery, monitor patient vital signs, and respond to medical emergencies with appropriate interventions, yet lacks any comprehension of the human suffering it witnesses. Medical servitors receive multiple limbs, typically 4 to 6 arms arranged around their torso, each equipped with different medical instruments or monitoring devices. The hard wiring of programming occurs throughout the augmentation phase. Tech priests inscribe basic behavioral protocols directly into the mind impulse unit's memory, creating responses that activate automatically under specific conditions. A labor servitor programmed to move cargo containers will automatically approach, grasp, lift, and transport containers when commanded, executing each step without conscious thought. More complex programming allows servitors to navigate facilities, avoid hazards, and perform sequential tasks. The Mechanicum guards its most sophisticated programming techniques jealously, with master chirurgeons developing specialized instruction sets for particular servitor types. These programs can take decades to perfect, refined through countless iterations and field testing. Chemical conditioning begins before surgery and continues throughout the servitor's operational life. Tech priests administer hormone regulators that suppress any remaining emotional responses and prevent the development of psychological conditions that might impair function. Growth hormones enhance muscle development in labor servitors, while suppressants prevent unnecessary tissue growth that might interfere with mechanical components. Anti-rejection medications maintain the interface between organic tissue and augmetic systems, preventing the immune responses that would otherwise attack foreign materials. The Mechanicum employs specialized chemical cocktails developed through millennia of experimentation, each formula calibrated for specific servitor types and operational environments. Genetic modification represents a more recent addition to servitor creation, though the techniques involved date back to the dark age of technology. Tech priests with access to gene labs can alter servitor DNA to enhance desired traits or eliminate problematic characteristics. Labor servitors might receive genetic modifications that increase bone density and muscle fiber efficiency. Technical servitors can be engineered with enhanced fine motor control at the cellular level. These modifications occur during the early stages of vat growth for purpose-bred servitors, or through retroviral treatments for converted criminals, though the latter approach proves less reliable and more prone to complications. Longevity treatments extend servitor operational life far beyond normal human parameters. The Mechanicum administers anti-aging compounds that slow cellular degradation, maintaining tissue integrity for decades or even centuries of service. Servitors do not age in the conventional sense. Their lobotomized brains show no signs of cognitive decline because they possess no higher cognitive functions to decline. Their bodies deteriorate slowly, maintained through regular chemical treatments and component replacement. A well-maintained servitor can operate for 100 years or more, though most suffer damage or wear that necessitates decommissioning long before reaching such ages. Protection against chaos corruption requires constant vigilance. The Mechanicum understands that servitors, despite their lobotomized state, still possess organic brains that warp entities might exploit. Tech priests inscribe protective wards onto mind impulse units, prayers to the Omnissiah etched in microscopic script across every surface. Chemical treatments include compounds believed to strengthen the barrier between real space and the warp, though the Mechanicum's understanding of such matters remains limited by their materialist theology. Servitors operating in areas of high warp activity receive additional conditioning, exposure to blessed unguents and sacred oils that tech priests believe provide spiritual protection. The effectiveness of these measures varies, and servitors sometimes fall to corruption despite all precautions, their lobotomized minds offering less resistance to demonic influence than fully conscious humans. The final stages of servitor creation involve testing and calibration. Tech priests subject newly created servitors to extensive trials, verifying that all systems function correctly and that programming executes as intended. Labor servitors lift progressively heavier weights, while technicians monitor their hydraulic systems and structural reinforcements for signs of failure. Technical servitors perform sample tasks under observation, their precision and accuracy measured against established standards. Medical servitors assist in supervised procedures, their responses to various medical situations evaluated by experienced chirurgeons. Servitors that fail these tests return to the surgical chambers for adjustment, or, if the failures prove too severe, face decommissioning and recycling. The Imperium's endless appetite for servitors demands a constant supply of raw material, and the Mechanicum has developed multiple sources to meet this demand. Each source presents distinct advantages and challenges, with tech priests selecting their stock based on availability intended function, and theological considerations that have evolved over 10,000 years of practice. Vat-grown servitors represent the most controlled approach to servitor creation. The Mechanicum maintains extensive clone forges on Mars and major forge worlds, where biological material grows in amniotic tanks under carefully regulated conditions. These facilities produce bodies according to precise specifications, with genetic templates optimized for particular servitor roles. The process begins with base human DNA, typically drawn from proven genetic lines that demonstrate desirable physical characteristics, robust skeletal structure, efficient muscle development, and neurological patterns that respond well to mind impulse unit integration. Tech priests modify these templates through gene manipulation, enhancing traits relevant to the servitor's intended function while suppressing unnecessary characteristics. The vat growth process takes approximately 18 months from inception to harvest, though this timeline varies based on the level of genetic modification involved. The developing clone never achieves full consciousness. Tech priests carefully regulate the growth hormones and neural development chemicals to ensure the brain develops only the most basic structures. The brain stem, motor cortex, and sensory processing centers grow normally, while the frontal lobes and limbic system remain stunted and underdeveloped. The result is a body with a partially formed brain, one that possesses the necessary neural architecture for servitor conversion without the ethical complications of destroying a fully developed human consciousness. The Mechanicum considers this approach theologically sound, as the vat-grown have never possessed souls in the conventional sense. They're incomplete brains, incapable of housing the spark of true human awareness. Vat-grown servitors offer significant advantages in standardization. Each batch emerges from the tanks with identical physical characteristics, allowing tech priests to apply conversion procedures with minimal variation. The surgical teams know exactly where each neural cluster will be located, which blood vessels require cauterization, and how the skeletal structure will respond to augmentation. This predictability reduces conversion time and minimizes failures. A forge world producing labor servitors for a new mining operation can grow hundreds of identical units, convert them using established protocols, and deploy them with confidence that their performance will meet specifications. The lack of prior memory engrams eliminates complications that sometimes arise when converting criminals or volunteers, whose previous experiences can occasionally interfere with programming despite thorough lobotomization. However, the Mechanicum has long observed that vat-grown servitors demonstrate slightly reduced efficiency compared to converted criminals. The reason remains subject to theological debate among tech priests. Some argue that the incomplete brain development, while eliminating ethical concerns, also removes subtle neural pathways that contribute to optimal performance. Others suggest that the soul, however diminished in a criminal, provides some ineffable quality that enhances the servitor's function in ways pure biology cannot explain. Practical experience supports these observations. Vat-grown servitors execute their programmed tasks adequately, but lack the slight edge of adaptability that converted criminals sometimes display. A labor servitor created from a vat-grown body will lift cargo containers with mechanical precision, while one converted from a dock worker might demonstrate marginally better spatial awareness, some fragment of muscle memory persisting despite lobotomization. The use of convicted criminals represents the most common source of servitor stock throughout the Imperium. Imperial law explicitly sanctions servitorization as punishment for serious crimes, with specific offenses carrying mandatory conversion sentences. Murder, heresy, sabotage of Imperial infrastructure, theft of Mechanicum property, and dereliction of duty resulting in significant loss of life all qualify for servitorization under the Lex Imperialis. Planetary governors possess authority to expand this list based on local conditions, and some worlds sentence criminals to servitorization for offenses that would merit lesser punishments elsewhere. The Adeptus Archives maintains detailed records of which crimes warrant conversion, and their judges apply these sentences with bureaucratic thoroughness. The theological justification for criminal conversion extends beyond simple punishment. The Mechanicum teaches that servitorization offers redemption, transforming those who have failed the Imperium into tools that serve humanity's continued survival. A murderer who once took life now preserves it through eternal labor. A heretic who questioned the Emperor's divinity becomes an unthinking instrument of imperial will. A thief who stole from the Mechanicum's forges now works those same forges without rest or complaint. This transformation represents both justice and mercy. The criminal's debt to society becomes repaid through service that continues until their biological components fail, while their consciousness, the part of them that chose to commit crimes, ceases to exist. They die as criminals but continue as servitors, their bodies redeemed through sacred union with the machine. Penal worlds supply vast quantities of criminal stock to nearby forge worlds. These prison planets house millions of convicts, their populations sustained through constant influx from surrounding systems. The Mechanicum maintains permanent facilities on major penal worlds, where tech priests process convicted criminals in industrial quantities. Transport ships arrive regularly, loading servitors for distribution throughout the sector. The efficiency of this system has made it the primary source of servitor stock in many regions. A single penal world can supply multiple forge worlds, with production rates measured in thousands of conversions per month. The criminals themselves receive no choice in the matter. Their sentences are final, and the arbites deliver them to Mechanicum facilities with the same dispassionate efficiency they apply to all aspects of imperial law. Heretics face servitorization with particular frequency. The Ecclesiarchy and the Inquisition both employ conversion as punishment for religious crimes, though their approaches differ. The Ecclesiarchy focuses on heretics who have spread false doctrine or worshipped the emperor incorrectly, viewing their transformation into servitors as appropriate irony. Those who rejected proper faith become mindless servants incapable of belief. The Inquisition casts a wider net, sentencing to servitorization anyone who has encountered chaos corruption but remains salvageable. A citizen who witnessed demonic incursion but resisted corruption might still face conversion, their memories too dangerous to allow them continued consciousness. The Inquisition considers this merciful compared to execution, and the servitor created from such individuals serves the Imperium despite the taint they witnessed. Volunteers represent the most unusual source of servitor stock, yet they appear throughout the Imperium in surprising numbers. The cult Mechanicus attracts devotees who view servitorization as the ultimate expression of faith in the machine god. These believers, often menials who have spent their lives in Mechanicum service, request conversion as their final offering. They perceive their transformation as transcendence, a shedding of weak flesh in favor of blessed union with sacred machinery. Tech priests conduct elaborate ceremonies before converting such volunteers, prayers and rituals that honor their devotion even as the surgical implements prepare to destroy their consciousness. The volunteers themselves often display disturbing enthusiasm, their faith so absolute that they welcome the oblivion of lobotomization as a form of enlightenment. Desperation drives other volunteers to seek servitorization. Imperial worlds where starvation, disease, or economic collapse has rendered normal life impossible sometimes see citizens offering themselves to the Mechanicum in exchange for their families receiving food, medical care, or passage off-world. The tech priests accept such bargains without moral consideration. They require biological material, and the volunteers provide it willingly, regardless of motivation. Some forge worlds maintain formal programs where citizens can volunteer for conversion in exchange for specific benefits delivered to designated beneficiaries. These arrangements prove mutually advantageous, providing the Mechanicum with stock while allowing desperate individuals to secure their family's survival through the ultimate sacrifice. Debt bondage to the Adeptus Mechanicus frequently ends in servitorization. Tech priests loan equipment, technology, or expertise to imperial organizations, planetary governments, and even individuals, with repayment terms that include servitor stock as acceptable compensation. A governor who cannot repay the Mechanicum for constructing new manufactorums might offer criminals from his prisons, but if the criminal supply proves insufficient, the contract may stipulate that volunteers or even randomly selected citizens fulfill the remaining obligation. The Mechanicum enforces these contracts with absolute rigor, viewing them as sacred agreements blessed by the machine god. Failure to provide the agreed-upon stock results in severe consequences, including trade embargoes, withdrawal of technical support, or in extreme cases, military action by Skitarii forces. Battlefield salvage presents a controversial but widespread practice that the Mechanicum employs with varying degrees of openness, depending on the Forge world and the political situation. Severely wounded Imperial Guard soldiers, who cannot be saved through conventional medical intervention, face a choice between death and conversion. Tech priests attached to Guard regiments possess authority to claim dying soldiers as servitor stock, particularly when those soldiers have sustained injuries that destroy higher brain function, while leaving the motor cortex and brain stem intact. A guardsman with catastrophic head trauma might have his ruined skull opened on the battlefield, a mind impulse unit installed directly into the exposed brain, and his body pressed immediately back into service as a gun servitor or combat loader. The practice horrifies some Guard officers, but proves grimly practical in extended campaigns, where servitor losses mount and replacement stock remains unavailable. The conversion of Space Marines who have failed their chapter represents one of the Mechanicum's most carefully guarded practices. Chapters maintain absolute authority over their battle brothers, and most prefer to grant the Emperor's peace to Marines who have dishonored themselves rather than allow servitorization. However, some chapters view conversion as appropriate punishment for specific failures. A Marine who fled from battle, who struck a superior officer, or who demonstrated cowardice might face servitorization as both punishment and continued service. The process differs from standard conversion due to Space Marine physiology. Their enhanced organs, reinforced skeleton, and modified brain structure require specialized techniques. The resulting servitors demonstrate remarkable capabilities, their superhuman strength and resilience making them formidable combat units even in their lobotomized state. These conversions remain rare, as chapters consider them shameful and prefer to handle disciplinary matters internally. Captured enemies provide another source, though the Mechanicum approaches this practice with caution. Orc bodies prove unsuitable for servitorization due to their fungal biology and aggressive cellular structure that continues fighting even after lobotomization. Eldar captives theoretically could be converted, but their psychic nature makes the process extremely dangerous, with high risks of warp corruption or violent psychic backlash during surgery. Tau prisoners have been successfully converted in some cases, their bodies responding to standard procedures, though the fire cast's physiology sometimes rejects augmentation. Human traitors and chaos cultists present the greatest risk. Their exposure to the warp leaves them vulnerable to corruption that can spread to the servitor units they become. The Mechanicum converts such prisoners only after extensive screening and purification rituals, and even then, the resulting servitors require constant monitoring for signs of taint. The sheer scale of servitor production across the Imperium demands all these sources operating simultaneously. A single hive world might consume thousands of servitors monthly, their bodies wearing out under constant labor or destroyed in industrial accidents. Forge worlds require millions of servitors to maintain their manufactorums, mining operations, and support facilities. The Imperial Guard uses servitors extensively for logistics, maintenance, and combat support roles. The ecclesiarchy employs them in their cathedrals and monasteries. Noble houses keep them as servants and status symbols. This universal demand ensures that the Mechanicum's conversion facilities never lack for material, with criminals, vat-grown bodies, volunteers, and salvaged wounded flowing constantly into surgical chambers across thousands of worlds. The Imperium's servitor population divides into distinct categories based on function, each type modified to excel at specific tasks that sustain humanity's galactic civilization. These classifications emerged over millennia of practical experience, with the Mechanicum developing standardized conversion protocols for each role. The distinctions between categories often blur in practice, as Forge worlds adapt designs to local needs and available stock, but certain fundamental types appear across the Imperium with remarkable consistency. Labor servitors form the foundation of imperial industrial capacity, their augmented bodies performing tasks that would break unmodified humans within hours. Cargo loaders represent the most common variant, their arms replaced with hydraulic clamps capable of grasping containers weighing several tons. These servitors work in planetary spaceports, ship loading bays, and warehouse facilities throughout the Imperium. Their conversion involves extensive skeletal reinforcement, with plasteel rods integrated along the spine and additional support structures installed throughout the ribcage. The legs receive similar treatment, reinforced joints and secondary actuators preventing collapse under extreme loads. A typical cargo loader stands over 2 meters tall, its hunched posture resulting from the massive hydraulic assemblies that replace its shoulders and upper arms. The servitor's hands have been removed entirely, replaced with clamp mechanisms that adjust automatically to grip objects of varying sizes and shapes. The Mind Impulse Unit programming for cargo loaders focuses on spatial awareness and load distribution. These servitors calculate optimal grip points instinctively, their lobotomized brains processing weight distribution through programming that operates below conscious thought. They navigate crowded cargo bays without collision, stack containers with precision that maximizes space efficiency, and operate loading equipment through direct neural interface. A cargo loader can work continuously for days without rest, its biological components sustained through intravenous nutrient feeds and chemical stimulants that prevent muscle fatigue. The servitor experiences no boredom, no physical discomfort from repetitive motion, no desire for anything beyond executing its programmed tasks. Construction servitors appear wherever the Imperium builds, their bodies modified for specific aspects of large-scale fabrication. Some variants carry integrated welding equipment, their right arms replaced with industrial plasma torches capable of fusing ceramite plates or cutting through reinforced steel. Others bear drilling assemblies, their limbs transformed into rotary boring mechanisms, used to create mounting points in rockcrete or pierce through damaged bulkheads during repair operations. Demolition servitors carry pneumatic hammers and cutting shears, their reinforced frames allowing them to tear through walls and structures that would require teams of unaugmented workers hours to breach. These servitors work alongside human construction crews on projects ranging from hive city expansion to fortress monastery construction, performing the most dangerous and physically demanding tasks while human overseers direct their efforts. Mining servitors endure conditions that would kill baseline humans within minutes. Their respiratory systems undergo complete replacement with rebreather units that filter toxic gases and provide oxygen in environments where none exists naturally. Radiation shielding covers their torsos, lead plates, and specialized polymers, protecting vital organs from the intense radiation found in certain mineral deposits. Their arms mount industrial excavation tools, rock drills, ore crushers, and sample extraction devices that allow them to work deep underground without surface support. Some mining servitors receive enhanced optical systems capable of penetrating darkness or detecting specific mineral compositions through spectral analysis. These units spend years in subterranean facilities, emerging only when their biological components fail or when the mine exhausts its resources. Maintenance drones represent perhaps the most numerous servitor type, performing the countless small repairs and adjustments that keep Imperial facilities operational. These servitors typically retain more original anatomy than heavy labor variants, their modifications focused on tool integration rather than brute strength. A maintenance servitor might possess 4 to 6 arms, each ending in different implements, screwdrivers, welding irons, wire cutters, and diagnostic sensors. Their programming includes extensive databases of common mechanical problems and standard repair procedures. They patrol Imperial facilities on predetermined routes, their augmented senses detecting equipment malfunctions through temperature variations, unusual vibrations, or electrical irregularities. When they identify problems, they execute repairs automatically, their multiple limbs working in coordination that would require teams of human technicians to replicate. Technical servitors occupy a higher tier of sophistication, their conversions preserving more neural tissue to handle complex cognitive tasks. Lex Mechanicus serve as living archives, their brains augmented with additional memory storage that holds vast quantities of technical data. These servitors undergo conversion that leaves portions of their language centers intact, allowing them to recite technical specifications, maintenance protocols, and historical records on command. Tech priests consult Lex Mechanicus when they need information from obscure sources, or when accessing physical data archives proves impractical. The servitor's brain functions as a biological database, retrieving information through queries transmitted directly to its mind impulse unit. A Lex Mechanicus can recite the complete manufacturing specifications for a Rhino transport, detail the maintenance history of a particular plasma reactor, or provide quotations from technical manuals dating back thousands of years. Calculus servitors handle mathematical operations beyond standard cogitator capacity. Their brains receive specialized augmentation that enhances the neural structures associated with numerical processing and pattern recognition. These servitors solve complex equations, perform statistical analysis, and calculate trajectories for artillery batteries or ship-to-ship combat. The Mechanicum employs them extensively in Forge World Manufactorums, where they optimize production schedules, calculate resource allocation, and monitor quality control across thousands of simultaneous manufacturing processes. Naval vessels carry calculus servitors in their bridge crews, the servitors processing sensor data and calculating firing solutions faster than mechanical cogitators. Their lobotomized state prevents distraction or error from emotional response, making their calculations reliably accurate within their programmed parameters. Auspex servitors extend the sensory capabilities of tech priests and military commanders through integrated scanning equipment. Their skulls house powerful auspex arrays capable of detecting life signs, energy signatures, and mechanical activity at considerable range. Some variants specialize in specific detection types. Thermal imaging servitors identify heat sources through walls and obstacles, while electromagnetic spectrum servitors detect power sources and active machinery. Military forces employ auspex servitors during urban combat operations, using them to sweep buildings for enemy presence before assault teams enter. The servitors advance into dangerous areas without concern for their survival, their sensors feeding real-time data back to human commanders who remain in relative safety. Interface servitors serve as living connection points between human operators and complex machinery. Their bodies bristle with data ports, cable connections, and transmission nodes that allow them to physically link with ship systems, defense networks, or industrial control mechanisms. A tech priest can connect directly to an interface servitor, using it as a relay to access systems too dangerous or corrupted for direct neural contact. These servitors absorb feedback surges and data corruption that would damage a tech priest's augmetics, their biological brains serving as buffers that protect more valuable personnel. When a system experiences catastrophic failure, the interface servitor typically dies, its brain destroyed by electrical overload or corrupted data streams, but the tech priest it protected survives to continue their work. Domestic and administrative servitors maintain the households of imperial nobility and the bureaucratic machinery of planetary governments. Scribe servitors sit in scriptoriums across the Imperium, their hands replaced with multiple writing implements that transcribe documents at superhuman speed. These servitors copy legal texts, reproduce administrative orders, and maintain the endless paper records that imperial bureaucracy demands. Their programming includes perfect penmanship and the ability to reproduce complex Gothic script without error. A scribe servitor can work for days without pause, producing hundreds of pages of flawless text, while human scribes rest or attend to other duties. Some variants include integrated printing mechanisms, their chests modified to contain ink reservoirs and stamping equipment that produces official seals and certifications. Service skulls represent a unique category, created from the actual skulls of deceased imperial servants rather than complete bodies. The Mechanicum removes the skull from a corpse, cleans it thoroughly, and installs miniaturized anti-gravity suspensors within the cranial cavity. The brain has been removed entirely, replaced with a compact cogitator that handles basic autonomous functions. Additional equipment varies based on intended purpose. Some serviceskulls carry recording devices, others mount small lumen globes to provide illumination, and military variants might include targeting lasers or proximity sensors. The Mechanicum creates serviceskulls from servants who performed valuable service during life, considering the transformation an honor that allows continued usefulness after death. Wealthy imperial citizens often commission serviceskulls from deceased family members, the floating skulls serving as both functional tools and macabre memorials. Cherubim disturb even hardened imperial citizens, despite their widespread use in ecclesiarchy facilities. These servitors begin as infant corpses or vat-grown bodies terminated at early developmental stages. The Mechanicum removes the limbs and installs anti-gravity suspensors similar to those used in serviceskulls. Artificial wings, crafted from synth muscle and covered in real or synthetic feathers, attached to the torso for aesthetic rather than functional purposes. The cherubim flies through suspensor technology, not wing movement. The face receives preservation treatment and often cosmetic modification to create an angelic appearance. The brain, barely developed in infant specimens, receives minimal augmentation sufficient only to execute simple tasks like carrying messages, holding candles during ceremonies, or monitoring specific areas. Ecclesiarchy priests consider cherubim appropriate servants for sacred spaces, their childlike appearance symbolizing innocence despite the grotesque reality of their construction. Administrative servitors populate government offices throughout the Imperium, performing clerical tasks that sustain planetary bureaucracies. These servitors typically retain more human appearance than industrial variants, their modifications limited to cranial implants and hand replacements with specialized digits for operating data slates and cogitator interfaces. They file documents, retrieve records from archives, and perform basic data entry tasks that would consume human workers' entire careers. The Administratum employs millions of administrative servitors across Terra alone, their tireless labor processing the endless stream of reports, requisitions, and census data that flow from across the galaxy. These servitors work in vast halls filled with filing systems and data terminals, their movements coordinated through central control systems that optimize workflow and prevent collisions in crowded spaces. Combat servitors represent the Mechanicum's military applications of servitor technology, creating weapons platforms that combine human neural processing with heavy armament. Gun servitors mount heavy bolters, multi-meltas, or plasma cannons directly onto their bodies, the weapons replacing one or both arms. Their torsos undergo extensive reinforcement to handle recoil forces that would shatter unmodified skeletons. Ammunition feeds integrate into their backs, connecting to internal storage that holds hundreds of rounds. The servitor's targeting systems link directly to its visual cortex through the mind impulse unit, allowing it to acquire and engage targets with mechanical precision. Gun servitors lack the tactical flexibility of human soldiers, but excel at static defense, their tireless vigilance and steady aim making them effective sentries for critical installations. Cataphren battle servitors represent the Mechanicum's most sophisticated combat units below true Skitarii. These heavily armed and armored servitors ride on tracked lower bodies, their legs removed entirely and replaced with armored chassis-mounting weapon systems and defensive equipment. The Cataphren destroyers carry grav cannons or plasma culverins, their firepower sufficient to destroy armored vehicles or eliminate enemy infantry at range. Cataphren breachers serve as mobile siege units, armed with heavy arc rifles or torsion cannons that tear through fortifications. Both variants wear thick armor plating that protects them from small arms fire and shrapnel. Their upper bodies retain human torsos and heads, though extensively modified with targeting systems, enhanced sensory equipment, and direct weapon control interfaces. Tech priests deploy Cataphren units during military operations, where their firepower and durability provide advantages that standard Skitarii cannot match. Praetorian servitors guard important Mechanicum facilities, and high-ranking tech priests, their programming focused on threat assessment and defensive response. These combat servitors receive more sophisticated neural preservation than standard gun servitors, allowing them to distinguish between authorized personnel and intruders, recognize complex threat patterns, and coordinate defensive actions with other security units. Their weapons integrate into their bodies, typically heavy stubbers or bolters, though some carry power weapons for close combat. Praetorian servitors stand motionless for hours or days, their patient vigil interrupted only by detected threats. When they identify hostile targets, they engage with ruthless efficiency, their targeting protocols prioritizing threats based on weapon type, armor level, and proximity to protected assets. Close combat servitors mount chain blades, power fists, or crushing claws where their arms once existed. These units serve in boarding actions, urban combat, and assault operations where ranged weapons prove less effective than brutal melee capability. Their programming includes basic combat algorithms, strike patterns, defensive positioning, and threat prioritization that allow them to fight effectively despite their lobotomized state. The servitor's pain receptors have been completely disabled, allowing it to continue fighting even with catastrophic injuries that would incapacitate human soldiers. A close combat servitor might lose an arm, suffer massive torso damage, or sustain injuries that expose internal mechanisms, yet continue attacking until its motor functions fail completely or its brain sustains terminal damage. The servitor's mind impulse unit contains layers of behavioral protocols that determine every aspect of its function, from basic motor control to complex task execution. These protocols exist as hard-coded instructions burned into the unit's memory circuits during the conversion process, creating behavioral patterns that operate below any level of conscious thought. The most fundamental layer handles autonomic functions, breathing regulation, heart rate maintenance, and the chemical balance necessary to keep biological tissues alive. These protocols run continuously without requiring external commands, functioning as background processes that sustain the servitor's organic components while it performs assigned tasks. Above this base layer, movement protocols translate neural impulses into physical action. When the servitor's brain receives a command to lift an object, the mind impulse unit activates specific motor neurons in precise sequence, coordinating muscle contractions and hydraulic actuator movements to execute the action smoothly. The servitor experiences this as natural motion, indistinguishable from voluntary movement, because its lobotomized brain lacks the cognitive structures necessary to recognize the difference between internally generated intentions and externally imposed commands. A labor servitor ordered to move cargo containers will walk to the designated location, grasp the container, lift it, and transport it to the specified destination, each action flowing naturally into the next without pause or hesitation. Task-specific protocols occupy the next hierarchical level, containing detailed instruction sets for particular operations. A technical servitor's mind impulse unit might hold thousands of these protocols, procedures for welding specific joint types, protocols for replacing particular components in common machinery, or sequences for diagnostic testing of power systems. The tech priests who program servitors spend considerable effort crafting these instruction sets, ensuring they cover every likely scenario the servitor will encounter during normal operations. Each protocol includes conditional branches that allow the servitor to adapt to minor variations in task execution. If a bolt proves too tight for standard torque, the protocol instructs the servitor to apply additional force up to predetermined safety limits. If a component shows damage during inspection, the protocol directs the servitor to mark it for replacement rather than attempting repair. Command hierarchies determine whose orders the servitor will accept and under what circumstances. Every servitor receives primary authorization codes during its initial programming, typically keyed to specific individuals or classes of personnel. A servitor assigned to a particular tech priest responds only to that priest's commands, ignoring instructions from others unless its programming includes secondary authorization for supervisory personnel. Military servitors recognize rank insignia and voice patterns. accepting orders from officers above specified grades while disregarding commands from enlisted personnel. This hierarchical structure prevents confusion in environments where multiple people might attempt to direct servitor actions, ensuring that the units respond to appropriate authority rather than whoever happens to speak to them first. The authorization system operates through multiple verification methods simultaneously. Voice recognition compares speech patterns against stored templates, analyzing pitch, rhythm, and linguistic markers unique to authorized individuals. Visual identification examines uniform details, rank insignia, and in some cases facial features, though this proves less reliable than voice analysis due to variations in lighting and viewing angles. Chemical sensors detect pheromone signatures and biological markers, providing additional verification that the person issuing commands matches authorized profiles. For maximum security applications, servitors require multiple simultaneous confirmations, correct voice pattern, appropriate rank insignia, and matching chemical signature before accepting commands. This layered approach prevents enemy forces from simply wearing captured uniforms or mimicking voices to subvert servitor units. Tech priests communicate with servitors through multiple channels beyond simple verbal commands. Lingua technis, the specialized language of the Mechanicum, includes specific grammatical structures and technical vocabulary designed for precise machine instruction. A tech priest speaking lingua technis to a servitor can convey complex commands in compressed format, each phrase containing layers of meaning that the servitor's mind impulse unit parses into detailed action sequences. The language eliminates ambiguity through its rigid structure, preventing the misinterpretation problems that plague natural language commands. When a tech priest instructs a servitor to execute maintenance protocol 7 gamma on power coupling array theta, the servitor understands exactly which components to inspect, what tools to use, and what tolerances to verify, all conveyed in a single sentence. Data-Cogitation represents an even more efficient communication method, consisting of binary code sequences transmitted through audible clicking, electronic pulses, or direct data link connection. Tech priests with appropriate augmentation can speak data-Cogitation at speeds far exceeding normal speech, their vocal implants producing rapid clicks and tones that convey information at rates measured in kilobytes per second. Servitors equipped to receive data can't process these transmissions directly through their mind impulse units, bypassing the slower neural pathways involved in language comprehension. A tech priest can transmit an entire maintenance procedure to a servitor in seconds, the data flowing directly into the unit's memory, where it becomes immediately executable. This method proves invaluable in combat situations or emergency scenarios where verbal commands would consume too much time. The noospheric interface allows tech priests with advanced augmentation to control servitors through direct thought transmission. The noosphere exists as a localized data network created by the combined transmission fields of multiple augmented individuals and machine systems. Within this network, properly equipped tech priests project their intentions as formatted data packets that servitors receive and interpret as commands. A tech priest standing in a manufactorum can simultaneously direct dozens of servitors through noospheric connection, each unit receiving individualized instructions without the priest speaking a word or making a physical gesture. The servitors execute these commands with perfect synchronization, their actions coordinated through the shared network in ways that verbal instruction could never achieve. Direct cranial connection provides the most intimate control method, used when precision or security demands absolute command authority. Tech priests insert data cables into servitor cerebral ports, establishing hardwired links between their own augmented nervous systems and the servitor's mind impulse unit. Through these connections, the priest can monitor the servitor's sensory input in real time, perceive what the servitor sees and feels, and issue commands with response times measured in milliseconds. The priest essentially puppets the servitor's body, their neural impulses translated directly into servitor motor function. This method sees frequent use during delicate repair operations, where the tech priest needs finer control than voice commands allow, or in situations where the servitor must operate in environments too hazardous for the priest to enter personally. Fail-safes permeate every level of servitor programming, designed to prevent autonomous action or deviation from authorized instructions. The most fundamental fail-safe monitors for command absence. If the servitor receives no instructions for a specified period, it enters standby mode rather than attempting independent action. The unit returns to its designated rest station, assumes a neutral posture, and reduces power consumption to minimum levels while awaiting new commands. This prevents servitors from wandering aimlessly or attempting to continue tasks without proper supervision. A cargo loader that completes its assigned work will not begin moving random containers on its own initiative. Instead, it returns to its charging station and waits for further orders, its programming incapable of generating self-directed goals or purposes. Behavioral boundaries restrict servitor actions even when following legitimate commands. A servitor programmed for cargo handling cannot be ordered to perform technical repairs, even by authorized personnel. Its mind impulse unit recognizes such commands as outside its operational parameters and enters an error state, awaiting clarification or alternative instructions. This limitation prevents misuse of servitors for tasks they lack the programming to execute safely. The boundaries also include ethical restrictions, though these stem from practical rather than moral considerations. Combat servitors will not fire on individuals wearing appropriate identification codes, their targeting protocols automatically excluding such targets from engagement parameters. This prevents friendly fire incidents and ensures servitors cannot be easily turned against Imperial forces through simple verbal commands. Logic loops catch contradictory or impossible instructions before the servitor attempts execution. If commanded to lift an object that exceeds its load capacity, the servitor's mind impulse unit recognizes the physical impossibility and refuses the command rather than damaging itself through futile effort. If ordered to travel to two different locations simultaneously, the servitor enters an error state and requests clarification. These loops operate as protective measures, preventing servitor damage from poorly considered commands, while also ensuring that confused or contradictory orders do not result in dangerous behavior. A servitor that receives conflicting instructions from two authorized personnel will halt all action and emit an error tone, signaling that it requires resolution of the command conflict before proceeding. The servitor's inability to adapt to unexpected situations represents both a safety feature and a fundamental limitation. When a servitor encounters circumstances outside its program parameters, it cannot improvise solutions or develop novel approaches to problems. A technical servitor programmed to replace specific components in a particular machine type will fail if presented with a similar but not identical machine, even if the repair procedure differs only slightly. The servitor lacks the cognitive flexibility to recognize that the same basic principles apply and adjust its actions accordingly. Instead, it reports task impossibility and awaits further instruction from authorized personnel who possess the judgment necessary to determine appropriate responses. This inflexibility manifests most dangerously during emergencies. A servitor programmed to follow specific evacuation routes during facility emergencies will continue attempting to use those routes even if they become blocked or damaged. The unit cannot assess alternative paths or determine safer options independently. It will repeatedly attempt to access the blocked route until its programming's emergency timeout triggers and forces it into standby mode. Thousands of servitors have been destroyed in industrial accidents and military actions because their programming lacked contingencies for the specific circumstances they encountered, their inability to adapt resulting in continued operation in lethal conditions until physical destruction ended their function. Literal interpretation of commands creates constant hazards that experienced personnel learn to anticipate. A servitor ordered to move those containers without specification of destination will attempt to fulfill the command using its default protocols, which might involve stacking them in inappropriate locations or blocking critical pathways. Instructed to continue working until finished without time limits, A servitor will operate until its biological components fail from exhaustion or its mechanical systems suffer catastrophic breakdown. The servitor cannot infer unstated intentions or apply common sense to obviously problematic instructions. It executes commands exactly as stated, regardless of consequences that any thinking being would recognize as undesirable. The Mechanicum trains its personnel extensively in proper servitor instruction, emphasizing the necessity of absolute precision in command formulation. Tech priests learn to specify every parameter explicitly: destination coordinates, time limits, success criteria, and contingency responses. They structure commands in formal syntax that eliminates ambiguity, using standardized terminology that the servitor's mind impulse unit parses without confusion. Experienced overseers develop command libraries, pre-formulated instruction sets for common tasks that have been refined through repeated use to eliminate all sources of misinterpretation. These libraries get uploaded to data slates that personnel consult when directing servitors, ensuring consistency across different operators and reducing the risk of poorly worded commands causing problems. Security measures protecting servitors from enemy subversion operate at multiple levels. Kill switches represent the most direct safeguard explosive charges implanted in the servitor's skull or chest cavity that detonate on command or when tampering is detected. These devices connect to the mind impulse unit through isolated circuits that monitor for unauthorized access attempts. Someone tries to reprogram the servitor, alter its command hierarchies, or extract data from its memory, the kill switch activates automatically, destroying the servitor and anyone attempting the intrusion. Tech priests trigger kill switches remotely when servitors face imminent capture, preventing enemy forces from acquiring functional units that might be studied or turned against Imperial forces. Loyalty programming exists as deeply embedded code that supersedes all other instructions. This programming defines the Imperium, the Mechanicum, and the Emperor as absolute priorities that cannot be overridden through any command sequence. A servitor cannot be ordered to attack Imperial personnel by anyone, even if that person possesses valid authorization codes. The loyalty programming recognizes such commands as invalid and triggers security responses. The servitor either shuts down completely or, in military variants, may turn on the person issuing treasonous instructions. This fail-safe has prevented numerous attempted subversions, though it occasionally causes problems when legitimate orders appear to conflict with loyalty parameters due to unusual circumstances or poor command formulation. Anti-tamper mechanisms protect the mind impulse unit's physical components from unauthorized modification. The unit's casing includes sensors that detect attempts to open it, triggering immediate shutdown and alert transmission to nearby Mechanicum facilities. Some variants employ more aggressive countermeasures: electrical discharge that damages tools used in tampering attempts, or acid reservoirs that dissolve the mind impulse unit's memory circuits if the casing is breached improperly. These mechanisms make captured servitors nearly useless to enemy forces, as any attempt to study their programming or modify their behavior results in destruction of the very systems being examined. Encryption protects command transmissions from interception and falsification. When a tech priest issues commands through data-cant or noospheric interface, the servitor's mind impulse unit verifies that the transmission includes proper authentication codes before executing instructions. These codes change according to complex algorithms that make them effectively impossible to duplicate without access to Mechanicum cryptographic databases. Enemy forces that attempt to control servitors through captured communication equipment find their commands rejected, the servitors recognizing the transmissions as unauthorized regardless of their content or apparent authority. Military servitors employ particularly sophisticated encryption, with authentication codes that rotate continuously and require synchronized chronometers to verify. Scrapcode detection systems monitor for corrupted data that might indicate chaos influence or hostile artificial intelligence intrusion. The Mechanicum understands that their servitors, despite lobotomization, remain vulnerable to certain forms of corruption that target their mechanical components rather than biological consciousness. Scrap code malicious data constructs that can subvert machine systems poses particular danger to servitors because their mind impulse units lack the sophisticated firewalls and security protocols of more advanced cogitators. Detection systems scan all incoming data for patterns associated with known scrap code variants, blocking suspicious transmissions and alerting tech priests to potential corruption attempts. Servitors that show signs of scrap code infection face immediate termination, their mind impulse units destroyed before the corruption can spread to other units or systems. Compartmentalization limits the damage from successful subversion attempts. Servitors operate in isolated command networks that prevent compromised units from affecting others. A servitor that falls under enemy control cannot issue commands to other servitors or access their programming, even if it possesses technical capability to interface with their systems. The authorization hierarchies that govern normal operations also restrict lateral communication, ensuring that servitors respond only to designated controllers rather than peer units. This architecture means that capturing or corrupting individual servitors provides limited advantage to enemy forces, as each unit must be subverted separately through the same difficult process. The Mechanicum maintains constant vigilance against servitor hijacking through regular inspection and testing. Tech priests examine servitors periodically for signs of tampering, unauthorized modifications, or behavioral anomalies that might indicate compromised programming. These inspections include physical examination of the mind impulse unit and its connections, diagnostic testing of command response patterns, and verification that authentication systems function correctly. Servitors that fail inspection face immediate removal from service and detailed analysis to determine whether they suffered malfunction, enemy interference, or corruption. The Mechanicum treats suspected subversion with extreme seriousness, often destroying entire servitor batches if even one unit shows signs of compromise, accepting the material loss as preferable to the risk of corrupted units operating within Imperial facilities. The servitor requires constant maintenance to sustain its hybrid existence, the marriage of flesh and machine demanding attention that neither purely biological nor fully mechanical systems would need. Tech priests schedule regular maintenance intervals based on servitor classification and operational intensity, with labor servitors working in hazardous environments requiring daily inspection, while administrative units in controlled conditions might go weeks between service appointments. The maintenance begins with visual examination, tech priests checking for obvious damage to external components, cracked hydraulic seals, frayed cables, corroded connection points, or damaged armor plating. They inspect the cerebral ports for signs of infection or tissue rejection, as the interface between skull and metal remains perpetually vulnerable to biological complications. Mechanical repairs form the bulk of routine maintenance work. Hydraulic systems lose pressure through microscopic seal degradation, requiring periodic replacement of gaskets and fluid reservoirs. Servitors working in industrial environments accumulate metal shavings, dust, and chemical residue in their joints and actuators, necessitating thorough cleaning and lubrication. The tech priests disassemble mechanical limbs, examining each component for wear patterns that indicate impending failure. They replace bearings before they seize, swap out worn gears before teeth strip, and test hydraulic pistons for pressure consistency. A cargo loader might have its arm assemblies completely rebuilt every 6 months, the constant stress of lifting heavy loads, wearing components past safe operational tolerances, even with regular maintenance. The Mind Impulse Unit receives particular attention during maintenance cycles. Tech priests connect diagnostic equipment to the servitor's cerebral ports, running test sequences that verify proper function of all neural interfaces. They check electrode contact with brain tissue, ensuring that none have shifted position or suffered corrosion that might degrade signal quality. The unit's cogitator components undergo memory verification, with the tech priest comparing current programming against archived baseline versions to detect data corruption or unauthorized modifications. Any discrepancies trigger immediate investigation, as even minor programming drift can result in unpredictable behavior or task execution errors. Biological tissue replacement becomes necessary as the servitor's organic components deteriorate despite chemical preservation treatments. The skin covering remaining flesh areas develops ulcers and necrotic patches, particularly around augmented integration points where metal presses against tissue. Tech priests cut away damaged skin and graft replacement tissue, either clone material grown specifically for the servitor or generic biological patches from mechanicum tissue banks. Internal organs require periodic replacement as well, with lungs, kidneys, and digestive systems failing under the constant chemical load necessary to sustain the servitor's modified physiology. A servitor might receive 3 or 4 complete organ transplants during its operational life, the replacement organs harvested from failed servitors, vat-grown biological material, or in rare cases, taken from fresh criminal stock awaiting conversion. The servitor's brain presents unique maintenance challenges. Unlike other organs, the brain cannot be replaced without destroying the servitor's trained behavioral patterns and task-specific learning. Tech priests instead focus on preserving existing neural tissue through aggressive chemical treatment. They flush the brain with oxygenated nutrient solutions that remove metabolic waste products and deliver compounds that promote cellular repair. Specialized medications reduce inflammation in neural tissue and suppress the autoimmune responses that sometimes develop when the body recognizes its own modified brain as foreign material. Despite these interventions, neural tissue degrades slowly but inevitably, neurons dying without replacement and neural pathways deteriorating through accumulated cellular damage. Nutrient supplementation sustains the servitor's biological components between maintenance sessions. Most servitors receive nutrition through intravenous feeds rather than conventional eating, their digestive systems either removed during conversion or atrophied through disuse. The nutrient solutions contain carefully balanced mixtures of proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, vitamins, and minerals, along with the numerous chemical additives necessary to maintain the servitor's modified physiology. Labor servitors require high-calorie feeds to fuel their enhanced musculature, while technical servitors need less nutritional input but more specialized compounds that support their preserved neural tissue. The feeding systems themselves require maintenance, with tubes and injection ports cleaned regularly to prevent bacterial growth that could cause systemic infection. Reprogramming prevents data corruption that accumulates in the mind, impulse units' memory systems over time. Cosmic radiation, electromagnetic interference, and simple electronic component degradation introduce errors into the servitor's programming, causing instruction sets to drift from their original specifications. Tech priests detect this corruption through behavioral analysis. A servitor that takes slightly longer to complete tasks, executes procedures in non-optimal sequence, or shows increased error rates likely suffers from programming degradation. The tech priest connects to the servitor's cerebral ports and uploads fresh copies of all programming, overwriting corrupted sections with verified code from secure archives. This process essentially resets the servitor to factory specifications, eliminating any accumulated errors, but also erasing any beneficial adaptations the unit might have developed through operational experience. Common failure modes plague servitors across all classifications, though specific problems vary based on the unit's role and operational environment. Behavioral loops represent one of the most frequent malfunctions, occurring when programming errors or neural damage cause the servitor to repeat actions indefinitely. A technical servitor might tighten the same bolt repeatedly, unable to recognize task completion and move to the next step in its procedure. A cargo loader could walk back and forth between the same 2 points, its navigation subroutines stuck in an endless cycle. These loops usually result from corrupted conditional statements in the servitor's programming. The code that tells it when a task is complete becomes damaged, so the servitor never receives the signal to stop and proceed to the next instruction. Tech priests identify looping servitors through observation or automated monitoring systems that track unit productivity, then repair the problem through reprogramming, or, if neural damage caused the issue, replacement of damaged brain tissue. Cognitive degradation manifests more gradually than acute malfunctions, the servitor's performance declining slowly as neural tissue deteriorates or programming corruption accumulates. The unit takes progressively longer to complete tasks, makes more frequent errors in execution, or begins requiring multiple command repetitions before responding. This degradation proves particularly insidious because it occurs so gradually that overseers might not notice the decline until the servitor's efficiency has dropped significantly. Regular performance testing helps identify degradation early, with tech priests comparing the servitor's current task completion times and error rates against baseline measurements taken when the unit was new. Servitors showing significant degradation undergo extensive maintenance, including neural tissue treatment, complete reprogramming, and replacement of any mechanical components that might contribute to reduced performance. Mechanical breakdowns occur with depressing frequency in servitors operating under harsh conditions. Hydraulic systems rupture, spilling fluid and leaving the servitor's limbs paralyzed. Actuators seize from accumulated contamination or bearing failure. Structural components crack under repeated stress, with plasteel reinforcement rods fracturing or weld points failing. Combat servitors suffer particularly high mechanical failure rates, the violence of battle subjecting their systems to forces far exceeding normal operational parameters. A gun servitor's weapon mounting might tear loose from recoil stress, or its ammunition feed mechanism could jam from battle damage. The Mechanicum maintains extensive spare parts inventories specifically to address these failures, with tech priests performing field repairs that replace damaged components and return servitors to operational status within hours. Electrical failures disable servitors as effectively as mechanical damage. Power routing systems short-circuit, cutting electricity to critical components. Data cables fray or disconnect, severing communication between the mind impulse unit and the servitor's mechanical systems. The mind impulse unit itself can suffer component failure, its delicate circuitry vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses, power surges, or simple age-related degradation. A servitor experiencing electrical failure might freeze in place, its brain still functioning but unable to communicate with its body. Alternatively, it might suffer partial failures where some systems remain operational while others go dark. A technical servitor could lose control of 3 of its 6 arms, or a combat servitor might retain mobility but lose weapon control. Tech priests diagnose electrical problems through systematic testing, checking each circuit and component until they isolate the failure point. Servitor madness represents the most disturbing failure mode, occurring when suppressed consciousness resurfaces despite lobotomization. The exact mechanism remains poorly understood even by the Mechanicum's most learned chirurgeons. Some theorize that incomplete lobotomization leaves neural pathways capable of regenerating over time, slowly rebuilding connections that restore fragments of awareness. Others suggest that extreme trauma or exposure to warp phenomena can shock dormant neural tissue back into activity. Regardless of cause, the symptoms prove unmistakable and deeply unsettling. The servitor begins exhibiting behaviors that suggest awareness. It might pause during tasks as if confused, turn its head to track movement when not commanded to do so, or emit vocalizations beyond the simple acknowledgement tones programmed into its responses. Advanced cases of servitor madness produce genuinely horrifying manifestations. The afflicted unit might begin weeping continuously, tears streaming from its augmented eyes while it mechanically performs assigned tasks. Some attempt communication, their lobotomized brains lacking the neural structures for coherent speech, but producing agonized moans or fragmented words that suggest terrible suffering. The servitor might claw at its own augmetics, trying to remove the mechanical components in what appears to be desperate attempts to reclaim its lost humanity. In extreme cases, the resurgent consciousness recognizes its condition, and the servitor's behavior suggests existential horror at finding itself trapped in a lobotomized body, aware but unable to think clearly, experiencing existence as an endless nightmare of fragmentary awareness and involuntary action. The Mechanicum responds to servitor madness with immediate termination. Tech priests consider the condition both dangerous and theologically problematic. A servitor experiencing consciousness resurgence becomes unpredictable, potentially dangerous if its awareness leads to resistance against commands or attempts to escape its servile condition. More troubling from a theological perspective, servitor madness suggests that the conversion process failed to properly purify the flesh through union with machine. The tech priests see the resurgent consciousness as a corruption, a failure of sacred technology that must be eliminated before it spreads doubt about the Mechanicum's methods. They destroy affected servitors quickly, usually through kill-switch activation or direct application of weapons fire, then incinerate the remains after removing any salvageable augmetic components. The effects of age and wear accumulate relentlessly despite all maintenance efforts. A servitor's biological components deteriorate according to accelerated timelines, the constant chemical treatments and physical stress aging tissue faster than normal human aging. Neural tissue proves particularly vulnerable, neurons dying steadily without the regeneration that occurs in unmodified brains. The servitor's reaction times slow, its movement becomes less precise, and its ability to process complex instructions gradually diminishes. Mechanical components wear out through constant use, with replacement parts themselves eventually requiring replacement as the cycle of repair and degradation continues. Even the mind impulse unit suffers from age, its electronic components degrading through thermal stress and electromagnetic interference until signal quality deteriorates below acceptable thresholds. Service life expectancy varies dramatically based on servitor classification and operational environment. Administrative servitors working in climate-controlled offices might function for 50 years or more, their limited physical demands and protected environment allowing extended operation with minimal degradation. Technical servitors average 20 to 30 years of service, their more complex tasks and greater neural preservation requirements resulting in faster degradation rates. Labor servitors in industrial environments typically last 10 to 15 years before accumulated damage and render them uneconomical to maintain. Combat servitors have the shortest operational lives, measuring their service in months or years rather than decades. The violence of battle destroys most combat servitors long before age-related degradation becomes relevant, with battlefield casualties far exceeding mechanical or biological failure rates. Signs of impending failure become recognizable to experienced tech priests and overseers. A servitor approaching the end of its operational life shows increased response latency, taking noticeably longer to acknowledge commands and begin task execution. Error rates climb as degraded neural tissue struggles to process instructions accurately. The unit requires more frequent maintenance, with mechanical failures occurring at shorter intervals as components reach the end of their useful life. Biological systems begin failing simultaneously, with organ function declining and tissue rejection accelerating despite increased chemical treatment. The servitor might develop tremors or uncoordinated movements as neural control deteriorates. Its vocalizations become distorted, the simple acknowledgement tones emerging slurred or at incorrect pitch. These symptoms indicate that the servitor has entered terminal decline, with complete failure inevitable within weeks or months regardless of maintenance efforts. Disposal protocols for failed servitors follow strict Mechanicum procedures designed to reclaim valuable components while ensuring proper respect for the sacred technology involved. Tech priests begin by removing the mind impulse unit, carefully extracting the device and its electrode arrays from the servitor's skull. These units often remain functional even when the servitor itself has failed, and the Mechanicum recycles them into new conversions after thorough testing and refurbishment. The extraction process requires precision to avoid damaging the delicate electrodes, with specialized tools designed specifically for this purpose. Once removed, the mind impulse unit goes to testing facilities where tech priests verify its functionality and determine whether it can be reused or must be broken down for component recycling. Other augmetic components receive similar salvage treatment. Hydraulic limbs, weapon systems, sensory equipment, and structural reinforcements all represent significant material investment that the Mechanicum refuses to waste. Tech priests systematically disassemble the Servitors' mechanical systems, cataloging each component and assessing its condition. Undamaged parts go directly into parts inventories for use in repairs or new conversions. Worn but serviceable components receive refurbishment, with damaged sections replaced and wear surfaces machined back to specification. Only completely destroyed or irreparably damaged parts face actual disposal, melted down for raw material recovery. The Mechanicum's recycling efficiency means that augmetic components might serve in dozens of different servitors over centuries, removed from failed units and installed in new ones in endless cycles of reuse. The biological remains receive less careful treatment. Once all augmetics have been removed, what remains is essentially organic waste, lobotomized brain tissue, degraded organs, and tissue that has spent years or decades saturated with chemicals that make it unsuitable for any further use. The Mechanicum considers these remains spiritually neutral, the sacred component of the servitor having been its mechanical augmentation rather than its flesh. Most facilities incinerate biological waste in industrial furnaces, the organic material reduced to ash that gets disposed of through standard waste management systems. Some Forge worlds use biological remains as feedstock for nutrient vat systems, breaking down the organic matter and recycling it into the nutrient solutions that sustain other servitors or vat growth operations. Ritual purification accompanies servitor disposal, the Mechanicum's theological framework requiring proper observance even for these lowly constructs. Tech priests recite prayers of decommissioning, thanking the Omnissiah for the service the servitor provided and requesting blessing for the components that will continue serving in new forms. They anoint salvaged augmetics with sacred oils, purifying them of any spiritual contamination they might have accumulated during operation. The Mind Impulse Unit receives particular attention, with tech priests performing ritual cleansing that involves both physical cleaning and data purges that erase all programming and operational logs. This purification serves practical and spiritual purposes. It ensures the components are physically clean and ready for reuse, while also symbolically severing their connection to the failed servitor and preparing them for rebirth in new forms. Failed servitors that suffered corruption or chaos taint face more extreme disposal procedures. The Mechanicum incinerates these units completely, including all augmetic components that would normally be salvaged. Tech priests consider the risk of spreading corruption through recycled parts too severe to accept any material recovery. They perform extensive purification rituals before destruction, prayers and blessings intended to cleanse the tainted components before fire reduces them to slag and ash. The incineration occurs in specially blessed furnaces, with tech priests monitoring the process to ensure complete destruction. The resulting ash undergoes additional purification treatment before disposal, and in extreme cases of corruption, the Mechanicum might jettison the remains into a star to guarantee absolute elimination of any lingering taint. The Adeptus Mechanicus operates as the Imperium's primary consumer of servitor labor, their Forge worlds representing concentrations of servitor population that dwarf usage elsewhere in Imperial space. On major Forge worlds like Mars, Risa, or Styges 8, servitors outnumber baseline human workers by ratios that sometimes exceed 100 to 1. The Mechanicum structures its entire industrial philosophy around servitor labor, viewing these lobotomized workers as ideal components in the grand machine of production. Unlike human laborers who require rest, food, social interaction, and living space, servitors operate continuously with minimal maintenance overhead. They never strike for better conditions, never question orders, never steal materials or sabotage equipment in acts of rebellion. A Forge world's manufactorums function as vast ecosystems, where servitors perform every task from raw material handling to precision assembly work, their tireless labor sustaining production rates that would require impossible numbers of human workers to match. The scale of servitor deployment in Mechanicum facilities staggers comprehension. A single manufactorum complex might employ 50,000 servitors across multiple shifts, with labor units moving raw materials, technical servitors operating assembly machinery, and specialized units performing quality control inspections. The servitors work in environments that would kill unaugmented humans within minutes, forge chambers where temperatures exceed human tolerance, chemical processing facilities filled with toxic fumes, radiation-saturated reactor maintenance areas, and vacuum-exposed sections of orbital installations. The Mechanicum designs these facilities around servitor capabilities rather than human needs, eliminating the expensive environmental controls that baseline workers would require. Ventilation systems remain minimal or non-existent in many areas, as servitors with rebreather augmentation need no breathable atmosphere. Temperature regulation focuses on protecting machinery rather than biological comfort, with servitors modified to withstand extremes that would cause human tissue to burn or freeze. Explorator fleets venturing beyond imperial borders carry servitor complements that constitute the majority of their operational personnel. A typical explorator vessel might have a crew of 2,000 tech priests and human support staff, but 15,000 servitors performing the countless tasks necessary to keep the ship functional during decades-long voyages into uncharted space. These servitors maintain the vessel's plasma reactors, repair hull damage from micrometeorite impacts, operate mining equipment when the fleet discovers resource-rich worlds, and serve as expendable scouts when exploring potentially dangerous locations. The tech priests view servitors as acceptable losses during exploration, sending them into unstable structures, toxic environments, or areas showing signs of Xeno's presence, while the valuable Mechanicum personnel remain safely aboard ship. An explorator fleet might lose hundreds of servitors during a single expedition, their bodies destroyed by environmental hazards, hostile aliens, or simple mechanical failure in extreme conditions. Yet the tech priests consider these losses trivial compared to the risk of losing trained personnel. Research stations operated by the Mechanicum demonstrate even more extreme servitor-to-human ratios. Facilities studying dangerous technologies, investigating archaeotech sites, or conducting experiments with unstable materials employ servitors for all direct interaction with hazardous subjects. A research station examining a recovered Dark Age of technology device might have 20 tech priests directing operations, but 200 servitors actually handling the artifact, operating testing equipment, and monitoring experimental parameters. When experiments fail catastrophically, as they frequently do when dealing with poorly understood ancient technology, the servitors absorb the casualties. The tech priests observe from protected positions, recording data as servitors are incinerated by energy discharges, torn apart by gravitational anomalies, or driven into malfunction by corrupted data streams emanating from the studied objects. The Mechanicum considers this approach both practical and theologically sound. Servitors exist to serve, and their destruction in pursuit of knowledge represents proper fulfillment of their purpose. The Astra Militarum employs servitors throughout its vast logistical network, though in numbers far smaller than Mechanicum usage. Guard regiments typically include servitor detachments assigned to specific support roles, where their tireless operation and immunity to morale problems provide clear advantages over human personnel. Artillery batteries use gun servitors as loaders and ammunition handlers, the units working with mechanical precision to maintain firing rates that human crews could not sustain for extended periods. A basilisk artillery piece might have a human crew of 5 operating the weapon itself, supported by 3 servitors that handle the backbreaking work of loading heavy shells, managing ammunition supplies, and performing basic maintenance between fire missions. The servitors work without fatigue, their augmented strength allowing them to manhandle artillery shells that would require multiple humans to lift safely. They show no fear of incoming counter-battery fire, continuing their loading duties, while human crew members take cover during bombardments. Battlefield engineering units incorporate servitors extensively, using them for tasks that combine heavy physical labor with exposure to enemy fire. Combat engineers deploy servitors to clear obstacles under fire, the lobotomized units advancing into kill zones to remove wire barriers, fill tank traps, or demolish fortifications, while human engineers direct operations from covered positions. Servitors equipped with dozer blades and excavation equipment prepare defensive positions, dig trenches, and construct firing positions with efficiency that exceeds human labor crews. The Guard accepts servitor casualties in these roles as preferable to losing trained engineers, viewing the units as expendable tools rather than soldiers. A combat engineering company might begin a campaign with 30 servitors and end it with 5, the rest destroyed by enemy action or worn out through constant operation in hazardous conditions. Logistics operations consume the largest numbers of Guard servitors, with cargo handling units working in supply depots, spaceport facilities, and field distribution points throughout war zones. These servitors load and unload transport vehicles, organize supply stockpiles, and move ammunition and equipment to forward positions. Their operation continues regardless of environmental conditions, with servitors working through sandstorms, monsoons, or chemical contamination that would halt human labor crews. A major Guard supply depot might employ 500 servitors in continuous operation, the units moving thousands of tons of material daily without the rest periods, meal breaks, or shelter requirements that human workers demand. The servitors work in shifts determined purely by maintenance schedules rather than biological needs, with units rotating to repair facilities for servicing, while others take their places in unbroken cycles of labor. The controversial practice of converting penal legion soldiers into servitors occurs with disturbing frequency in extended campaigns. Guard commanders possess authority to sentence penal troopers to servitorization for serious disciplinary infractions, desertion attempts, or failure in assigned duties. The threat of conversion serves as powerful motivation for penal legions, their troops understanding that death in battle represents a better fate than lobotomization and eternal servitude. Tech priests attached to Guard forces perform field conversions using portable surgical equipment, transforming condemned prisoners into functional servitors within hours. These conversions lack the precision and sophistication of Forge World procedures, resulting in servitors with shorter operational lives and higher malfunction rates, but Guard commanders consider them adequate for immediate battlefield needs. A penal legion that suffers heavy casualties might see its survivors converted en masse, their bodies repurposed as servitors that continue serving the regiment that once counted them as soldiers. Space Marine chapters maintain far smaller servitor populations than other Imperial institutions, their emphasis on self-reliance and warrior culture limiting servitor usage to specific necessary roles. A typical chapter might employ several thousand servitors across its fortress monastery, fleet vessels, and forward operating bases, but these numbers pale compared to the tens of thousands of chapter serfs who perform most support functions. The Space Marines view excessive servitor dependence as weakness, preferring that their human auxiliaries remain thinking beings capable of initiative and adaptation. However, certain tasks prove better suited to servitor labor, and the chapters employ them in these specific capacities without hesitation. Chapter fleet vessels carry servitor complements that handle the most dangerous and unpleasant maintenance tasks. These units work in the plasma reactor chambers, their augmented bodies resistant to the intense radiation that would kill even Space Marines with extended exposure. They perform repairs in vacuum-exposed sections of damaged vessels, their rebreather systems, and pressure-resistant modifications, allowing them to work in conditions where even power-armored Marines would face difficulties. Gun servitors serve as backup weapon operators for the vessel's defensive batteries, their reaction times and targeting precision providing reliable performance during naval engagements. A battle barge might carry 300 servitors distributed throughout its systems, the units maintained by the ship's tech priests and deployed wherever their specialized capabilities prove necessary. Fortress monasteries employ servitors in roles that combine security requirements with menial labor. Gun servitors stand watch in armories and gene seed repositories, their unwavering vigilance and inability to be bribed or corrupted making them reliable sentries for the chapter's most sacred treasures. Labor servitors maintain the fortress's physical infrastructure, performing repairs and construction work in areas too mundane for chapter serfs to handle efficiently. Technical servitors assist the chapter's tech marines in maintaining the vast quantities of wargear and vehicles that space marine operations require, their multiple tool limbs and specialized programming allowing them to perform routine maintenance, while the tech marines focus on more complex repairs and sacred rituals. A fortress monastery might house 2,000 servitors, though this number fluctuates based on the chapter's current operational tempo and maintenance requirements. Weapon-bearer servitors represent a uniquely Space Marine application of servitor technology, units modified specifically to carry and supply ammunition for the chapter's heavy weapons. These servitors accompany Devastator squads into battle, their bodies modified to carry massive ammunition loads for heavy bolters, las cannons, and missile launchers. The servitors march behind the Space Marines, their programming allowing them to track their assigned warrior and provide ammunition on demand. When a Devastator's weapon runs dry, the weapon-bearer servitor advances to his position and supplies fresh ammunition with mechanical efficiency, then retreats to a safe distance while the Marine continues firing. These servitors wear heavy armor plating to improve their survival on the battlefield, though chapters accept that many will be destroyed during intense combat. The servitors lack the combat capability of actual Space Marines, but provide valuable fire support by ensuring heavy weapons remain supplied during extended engagements. Different chapters demonstrate varying approaches to servitor usage based on their cultures and tactical doctrines. The Iron Hands employ servitors extensively, their reverence for machine augmentation extending to acceptance of servitor labor as proper synthesis of flesh and steel. Iron Hand servitors often receive more sophisticated modifications than standard patterns, with the chapter's tech marines crafting specialized units that reflect their belief in mechanical superiority. The Space Wolves, conversely, use servitors minimally, their tribal culture viewing the lobotomized units with distaste and preferring that chapter serfs handle most support functions. Space Wolf servitors typically work in areas where their presence doesn't offend the chapter's sensibilities, deep in the bowels of ships or in isolated maintenance facilities where the warriors rarely encounter them. The Blood Angels maintain servitors, but keep them away from the chapter's living spaces, concerned that the presence of lobotomized humans might trigger the Black Rage in susceptible battle brothers. The Inquisition employs servitors as expendable assets during investigations and operations where human agents would face unacceptable risks. Inquisitors use servitors to search areas suspected of containing traps, sending the lobotomized units ahead while the Inquisitor and their retinue remain at safe distances. Combat servitors serve as bodyguards and assault troops during raids on heretic hideouts or Xenos installations, their immunity to fear and pain making them reliable in situations where human soldiers might break under stress. Some Inquisitors maintain specialized servitors created from captured heretics, the units serving as both practical tools and symbolic demonstrations of the Inquisition's power to transform enemies into servants. An Inquisitor investigating a cult might convert captured cultists into servitors on site, using portable conversion equipment to transform prisoners into scouts or combat units that then assist in hunting down their former comrades. Radical Inquisitors sometimes push servitor technology into disturbing directions, creating units that blur the boundaries between servitor and something more sinister. These Inquisitors might preserve more consciousness than standard lobotomization allows, creating servitors that retain fragments of memory and personality while remaining under complete control through their mind impulse units. The Inquisitor uses these semi-aware servitors for infiltration operations, the units capable of passing as normal humans in casual observation, while their programming ensures absolute loyalty. Other radicals experiment with servitors created from Xenos subjects, attempting to harness alien capabilities within controllable lobotomized forms. The Ordo Xenos officially forbids such practices, but enforcement proves difficult given the Inquisition's decentralized structure and the autonomy individual inquisitors enjoy. The Adeptus Administratum operates the Imperium's vast bureaucratic machinery with servitor support that focuses on data processing and clerical functions. Scribe servitors work in scriptoriums across millions of worlds, their tireless copying and document reproduction sustaining the paper-based record-keeping that Imperial administration demands. A single administratum facility on a hive world might employ 10,000 scribe servitors, the units working in massive halls where they transcribe documents, copy reports, and maintain the physical archives that store Imperial records. These servitors possess more sophisticated neural preservation than labor units, their programming including complex language processing capabilities and the ability to reproduce intricate Gothic script with perfect accuracy. They work in silence except for the scratching of their writing implements and the occasional acknowledgement tone, their presence creating an atmosphere of mechanical efficiency that characterizes administratum operations. Lex Mechanic servitors serve as mobile reference libraries for administratum officials, their augmented brains storing vast quantities of regulatory information, legal precedents, and administrative procedures. A senior administratum adept might have personal Lex Mechanic servitors that follow them throughout their duties, ready to recite relevant regulations or provide historical context for decisions. These servitors receive regular programming updates as new regulations are issued or existing procedures change, ensuring they maintain current information. The administratum values Lex Mechanics highly, as their instant access to detailed information allows officials to make decisions without consulting physical archives or waiting for database queries to complete. A Lex Mechanic can recite the complete tax code for a planetary system, detail the proper procedures for processing specific types of requisition forms, or provide the historical precedents for unusual administrative situations. The ecclesiarchy maintains servitors primarily for maintenance of their vast cathedral complexes and to perform tasks deemed too menial for human clergy. Labor servitors clean the enormous spaces of major cathedrals, their tireless work keeping marble floors polished, brass fixtures gleaming, and countless candles lit throughout the structures. These servitors work during hours when the faithful are absent, their presence considered inappropriate during services and ceremonies. Technical servitors maintain the complex systems that support cathedral operations, heating, lighting, water purification, and the mechanical components of organs and other ceremonial equipment. The ecclesiarchy prefers that these servitors remain out of sight, hidden in maintenance corridors and service areas where they can perform necessary functions without disturbing the spiritual atmosphere the church cultivates. Cherubim represent the ecclesiarchy's most distinctive servitor usage, the flying infant servitors serving ceremonial and practical functions throughout church facilities. These units hover through cathedrals during services, carrying censers that spread blessed incense, holding candles that provide symbolic illumination, or bearing sacred texts for priests to reference during ceremonies. The ecclesiarchy justifies cherubim creation through theological arguments about the innocence of children and their fitness to serve in holy spaces, though many within the Imperium find the practice disturbing regardless of religious rationalization. A major cathedral might maintain hundreds of cherubim, the units floating through the vast spaces in carefully choreographed patterns during important ceremonies. Outside of services, cherubim perform messenger duties, carrying documents between church officials or delivering orders to subordinates throughout cathedral complexes. Noble houses across the Imperium employ servitors as status symbols and practical servants, with the number and sophistication of servitors owned indicating the family's wealth and connections. A planetary governor might maintain a household staff of 200 servitors, the units performing every task from food preparation to grounds maintenance. These domestic servitors typically receive cosmetic modifications that make them less disturbing to look at, synthetic skin that appears more natural, facial features that seem almost human, and clothing that conceals their augmented components. The nobility prefer servitors that can pass for human servants at casual glance, finding the obvious lobotomization scars and mechanical components aesthetically displeasing in their living spaces. Some noble houses commission custom servitors from the Mechanicum, units designed for specific purposes like wine service, musical performance, or maintenance of particular types of equipment. Wealthy merchants and rogue traders employ servitors extensively aboard their vessels and in their business operations, valuing the unit's reliability and immunity to corruption. A rogue trader's flagship might carry 5,000 servitors handling everything from cargo loading to weapons operation, with the human crew focused on command, navigation, and tasks requiring judgment that servitors cannot provide. The rogue trader accepts servitor losses as operational expenses, replacing destroyed or worn-out units at forge worlds encountered during their travels. Some rogue traders develop preferences for servitors from particular forge worlds, believing that certain Mechanicum facilities produce superior units, and they route their voyages to ensure regular access to their preferred suppliers. The ubiquitous nature of servitor labor throughout Imperial society means that most citizens encounter these units regularly without giving them much thought. In hive cities, servitors work in industrial facilities, maintain infrastructure, and perform countless tasks that keep the massive urban complexes functional. Citizens grow accustomed to their presence, learning to ignore the lobotomized workers as they would any other piece of machinery. Children growing up in the Imperium accept servitors as normal parts of their environment, no more remarkable than the countless other technologies that sustain human civilization across the galaxy. This casual acceptance of servitors reflects broader Imperial attitudes toward human life and the individual's value relative to humanity's collective survival. The servitor represents the Imperium's pragmatic approach to existence in a hostile galaxy. Human consciousness matters less than human utility, and the transformation of thinking beings into lobotomized tools generates no moral concern in a civilization where billions die daily in service to the Emperor's vision. The question of whether servitorization constitutes just punishment has troubled Imperial philosophers and theologians since the practice became standardized during the Great Crusade. The Adeptus Archives maintains extensive legal codes that specify which crimes warrant conversion, treating servitorization as both punishment and practical necessity. Murder, particularly of Mechanicum personnel or destruction of sacred machinery, carries mandatory servitor conversion sentences across most Imperial worlds. Heresy against the Emperor's divinity results in servitorization when the ecclesiarchy determines the heretic's consciousness represents too great a risk to allow continued existence. Theft of Mechanicum property, sabotage of Imperial infrastructure, and dereliction of duty causing significant loss of life all appear on the standard conversion lists that Archives judges consult when sentencing criminals. The theoretical justification presents servitorization as merciful compared to execution. The criminal's body continues serving humanity rather than being wasted through death, their labor repaying the debt their crimes created. Mechanicum theology reinforces this view, teaching that the lobotomized criminal achieves redemption through transformation into a tool of the Omnissiah's will. The consciousness that chose to commit crimes ceases to exist, while the body becomes purified through sacred union with blessed machinery. Tech priests performing conversions on convicted criminals recite prayers thanking the machine god for providing this opportunity for redemption, viewing the process as spiritually beneficial for all involved. Reality proves considerably darker than theological justification suggests. Planetary governors possess authority to expand conversion lists based on local conditions, and many abuse this power to eliminate political opponents or suppress dissent. A governor might declare criticism of his administration a form of sedition warranting servitorization, effectively silencing opposition through threat of lobotomization. Workers who organize labor protests face conversion sentences for disrupting Imperial production quotas. Citizens who witness corruption by local officials sometimes disappear into Mechanicum facilities, their knowledge deemed too dangerous to allow them continued consciousness. The Arbites theoretically oversee these expansions of conversion authority, but enforcement proves inconsistent across the Imperium's vast territories, with isolated worlds operating under conversion policies that would shock citizens of more legally orthodox planets. Documented cases of unjust servitorization appear throughout Imperial records, though rarely receive official acknowledgement. On the Forge world of Metalica during the 39th millennium, a tech priest faction used conversion authority to eliminate rivals within the Mechanicum hierarchy. They fabricated charges of machine, spirit disrespect, and sacred protocol violations, sentencing dozens of opposing tech priests to servitorization before other factions discovered the conspiracy and purged the perpetrators. The converted tech priests had already been lobotomized and deployed throughout Metalica's manufactorums, their extensive knowledge and training wasted in menial labor roles. The Fabricator General ordered their remains recovered and given proper funeral rites after the conspiracy's exposure. But the tech priests themselves were beyond recovery, their consciousness destroyed by procedures that left only enough neural tissue to operate cargo loaders and maintenance equipment. The Hive world of Vergast experienced similar abuses during the Sabbat world's crusade, when local authorities used servitor conversion to suppress worker unrest in munitions factories. Thousands of laborers protesting unsafe conditions and inadequate rations found themselves sentenced to servitorization for disrupting war production. Mechanicum facilities converted them in industrial quantities, their bodies modified for the same factory work they had protested, now performed without complaint or consciousness. Imperial Guard forces arriving to recruit from Vergast's population discovered the practice and reported it to Crusade Command, but by then the conversions had been completed. The authorities responsible faced execution for misuse of conversion powers, though this provided no comfort to the thousands already lobotomized and serving as servitors throughout Vergast's industrial complexes. The ecclesiarchy wrestles with profound theological questions regarding servitors' spiritual status. The fundamental issue concerns whether the lobotomized retain their souls, and if so, what this means for their ultimate fate after death. Orthodox ecclesiarchy doctrine teaches that the soul represents humanity's connection to the Emperor and their potential for spiritual salvation. A servitor's destroyed consciousness raises disturbing questions about whether the soul can exist without the mind that housed it, or if lobotomization destroys the soul along with higher cognitive functions. Different theological schools within the Church offer competing interpretations, none entirely satisfactory. The redemptionist faction argues that servitorization destroys the soul completely, viewing the process as spiritual death that happens to leave the body functioning. They point to the servitor's complete lack of capacity for faith, prayer, or recognition of the Emperor's divinity as evidence that nothing spiritually significant remains after conversion. A servitor cannot be saved because nothing exists within it to save. This interpretation provides comfort to those disturbed by servitor creation, as it suggests the converted individual truly dies during lobotomization, with only an empty shell remaining to perform mechanical tasks. Redemptionists consider servitorization appropriate punishment for serious crimes precisely because it represents total spiritual annihilation, a fate worse than mere physical death. The Salvationist school maintains that souls persist despite lobotomization, trapped within unresponsive flesh and unable to express faith or seek redemption. They argue that the Emperor's light touches all human souls regardless of mental capacity, and that servitors' souls remain present even if their consciousness has been destroyed. This interpretation generates considerable theological anxiety, as it suggests millions of souls exist in states of perpetual imprisonment, unable to pray, unable to seek the Emperor's grace, and unable to die properly until their bodies finally fail. Salvationists advocate for prayers on behalf of servitors, regular blessings of servitor work areas, and proper funeral rites when servitors are decommissioned. Some Salvationist priests maintain that servitors accumulate spiritual merit through their labor, their enforced service counting as penance that might earn salvation despite their inability to consciously seek it. The question of whether servitor labor constitutes valid penance divides ecclesiarchy theologians further. If servitors retain souls but lack consciousness, can their forced labor satisfy the debt their crimes created? Traditional penance requires the penitent to consciously accept their punishment and willingly perform acts of contrition. A servitor does neither, its labor extracted through programming rather than chosen as an act of spiritual redemption. Some theologians argue this makes servitorization ineffective as penance, the converted criminal's soul remaining stained by unpaid debts that their lobotomized body's labor cannot satisfy. Others counter that the emperor sees all service regardless of the servant's awareness, and that a servitor's decades of tireless labor represent penance of the highest order, the ultimate sacrifice of self in service to humanity's survival. The Mechanicus's pragmatic view of servitors as tools conflicts sharply with other imperial institutions, varying degrees of discomfort regarding the practice. Tech priests approach servitor creation with the same emotional detachment they apply to all technological processes, viewing lobotomization as a sacred procedure that transforms flawed biological material into useful components of the Omnissiah's grand design. They see no ethical complexity in the practice, considering debates about consciousness, suffering, or spiritual status as irrelevant distractions from practical engineering concerns. A servitor functions or it doesn't, performs its assigned tasks adequately or requires adjustment, serves efficiently or needs replacement. The tech priest evaluates servitors using the same criteria they apply to any other machine system, with no special consideration for the human origins of the biological components involved. This attitude disturbs many outside the Mechanicum, even those who accept servitor use as necessary. Imperial Guard officers who rely on servitor labor in their logistics operations often express discomfort with the lobotomized units, preferring to minimize direct interaction and delegate servitor supervision to subordinates. The officers understand the practical benefits servitors provide, but find their presence unsettling in ways they struggle to articulate. Something about the servitor's human-shaped body performing mechanical tasks with inhuman precision triggers instinctive revulsion that practical necessity cannot entirely overcome. Guard commanders typically segregate servitors from regular troops during garrison duty, concerned that constant exposure to lobotomized humans might damage morale or create discipline problems among soldiers who begin questioning the value the Imperium places on human life. Space Marine chapters demonstrate even stronger ambivalence towards servitor technology. The Adeptus Astartes builds its entire culture around the concept of the superhuman warrior, the individual who transcends normal human limitations through transformation into something greater. Servitors represent the opposite transformation, the reduction of human consciousness to mechanical simplicity. Many chapters view this with barely concealed distaste, considering servitor creation a necessary evil rather than an achievement to celebrate. The Space Wolves openly express their disgust with the practice, their tribal culture valuing individual consciousness and personal honor in ways that make servitor lobotomization seem like spiritual murder. Wolf priests refuse to perform funeral rites for servitors, arguing that the person died during conversion, and the servitor represents only animated flesh rather than a fallen warrior deserving of respect. The salamanders maintain similar attitudes, their emphasis on humanity's value and the sanctity of human life creating tension with servitor usage. Salamander tech marines perform servitor maintenance with visible reluctance, treating the duty as unpleasant necessity rather than sacred work. The chapter limits servitor deployment to roles where human workers would face unacceptable danger, preferring to employ chapter serfs for most support functions, despite the efficiency advantages servitors would provide. Salamander captains have been known to argue with Mechanicum representatives about servitor allocation during joint operations, the Space Marines pushing back against tech priest assumptions that servitors represent optimal solutions for all labor-intensive tasks. The Adeptus Ministerum's relationship with servitor technology reflects the ecclesiarchy's broader theological uncertainties. Church facilities employ servitors extensively while simultaneously maintaining that excessive servitor use represents spiritual danger. Ecclesiarchy doctrine warns against allowing servitors to replace human workers in roles that provide opportunities for faithful service and spiritual growth. A cathedral that uses servitors for all maintenance work denies human workers the chance to serve the emperor through honest labor, potentially damaging their souls by removing opportunities for meaningful contribution to the church's mission. Cardinals issue periodic guidance limiting servitor deployment in ecclesiarchy facilities, though enforcement varies dramatically based on local conditions and the practical demands of maintaining vast cathedral complexes with limited human staff. Xenos species that encounter imperial servitors react with reactions ranging from confusion to horror, their responses revealing fundamental differences in how various civilizations approach technology and consciousness. The Tau Empire's first documented encounter with servitors occurred during the Damocles Gulf Crusade, when fire caste warriors captured an imperial supply depot and discovered hundreds of cargo handling servitors continuing their work despite the facility's fall. Tau observers initially assumed the servitors were sophisticated robots, their Earth-caste engineers examining several units to understand imperial automation technology. The discovery that servitors contained lobotomized human brains provoked reactions that Tau records describe as profound disturbance and incomprehension. Tau philosophy emphasizes the greater good, the concept that all sentient beings should contribute to collective advancement while maintaining their consciousness and capacity for growth. Servitorization violates this principle absolutely, destroying consciousness to create biological machines that serve without understanding or development. Water caste diplomats attempting to negotiate with imperial authorities raised servitor creation as evidence of humanity's barbarism, arguing that any civilization that lobotomizes its own people demonstrates fundamental moral corruption. Imperial negotiators dismissed these concerns as Zeno's failure to understand human necessity, pointing out that the Imperium's survival demands efficient use of all resources, including criminal populations that would otherwise represent wasted potential. The philosophical gulf between Tau and imperial perspectives on servitors contributed to the Damocles Crusade's ultimate failure to achieve lasting peace, the Tau unable to reconcile cooperation with a civilization that practices institutionalized lobotomization. The Eldar view servitors with contempt rather than horror, considering the practice crude evidence of humanity's primitive understanding of consciousness and technology. Eldar civilization achieved technological heights that humanity has never matched, creating wraithbone constructs that respond to psychic direction and artificial intelligence systems that operated without requiring lobotomized biological components. From the Eldar perspective, servitors represent the desperate improvisation of a species that lacks both the psychic sophistication to create proper psycho-responsive technology and the technical knowledge to develop true artificial intelligence. Eldar who encounter servitors during raids on Imperial facilities regard them with the same disdain they show toward other aspects of human technology, viewing the lobotomized units as examples of Moan-Keith inefficiency and waste. Craftworld Eldar have occasionally attempted to mercy kill servitors during raids, their aspect warriors destroying the lobotomized units out of what they consider compassion for trapped consciousness. These attempts reflect Eldar assumptions about servitor awareness rather than accurate understanding of the lobotomization process. The Eldar assume servitors retain some level of consciousness trapped within unresponsive bodies, unable to express their suffering, but experiencing existence as perpetual torment. Their psychic senses sometimes detect faint emanations from servitor brains that they interpret as evidence of imprisoned awareness, though whether these represent actual consciousness or merely residual psychic impressions from the pre-conversion individual remains unclear even to Eldar farseers who have studied the phenomenon. Chaos forces corrupt servitor creation into practices that exceed even the Imperium's grim standards. Dark Mechanicum tech priests who have pledged themselves to the ruinous powers maintain servitor production facilities in the Eye of Terror and other warp-corrupted regions, but their conversion processes deliberately preserve consciousness while enslaving it to demonic influence. These corrupted servitors experience full awareness of their lobotomized state, their minds trapped in bodies they cannot control, while demons whisper madness through their mind impulse units. The Dark Mechanicum considers this an improvement over standard servitor creation, arguing that conscious suffering generates psychic energy that feeds the chaos gods, while also providing more sophisticated behavioral responses than pure lobotomization allows. Chaos servitors created through these corrupted processes demonstrate capabilities that exceed Imperial servitor performance, their trapped consciousness providing problem-solving abilities and adaptability that lobotomized units cannot match. However, they also suffer constant psychological torture, their awareness of their condition generating anguish that manifests in disturbing behaviors. Chaos servitors weep continuously while performing tasks, their tear ducts modified to prevent the fluid from interfering with optical systems. They emit constant low moaning sounds, their vocal cords unable to form coherent words, but expressing suffering through wordless cries. Some develop compulsive behaviors that their programming cannot suppress, repeatedly striking themselves or scraping against walls in futile attempts to damage their own bodies enough to achieve death. The Imperium's Ordo Malleus maintains specialized protocols for dealing with corrupted servitors encountered during operations against Chaos forces. Inquisitors who discover Chaos servitor facilities order complete destruction of all units and equipment, considering the corrupted technology too dangerous to study or salvage. The Inquisition recognizes that Chaos servitor creation techniques represent genuine innovations that might improve Imperial servitor performance, but the spiritual contamination involved makes any attempt to adopt these methods unthinkable. Tech priests who have examined Chaos servitor facilities report that the corrupted units' enhanced capabilities come at the cost of inevitable demonic possession, with the preserved consciousness serving as an anchor point for warp entities to manifest in real space. The Dark Mechanicum accepts this as desirable outcome, viewing demonic possession of servitors as the ultimate synthesis of flesh, machine, and warp energy that their corrupted theology celebrates. Human populations living under chaos control face servitorization as one of many fates worse than death that await them. Dark Mechanicum facilities convert captured Imperial citizens into servitors using methods that deliberately maximize suffering during the conversion process. The lobotomization proceeds slowly over days or weeks, with the subject remaining conscious as portions of their brain are destroyed incrementally. Tech priests corrupted by Khorne favor this approach, believing that the terror and pain generated during extended conversion pleases the blood god. Slaaneshi Dark Mechanicum facilities modify the process to heighten sensory input during conversion, the subject experiencing overwhelming sensation as their consciousness fragments. Nurglite tech priests allow disease and decay to corrupt servitor bodies even as they perform their functions, creating shambling plague servitors that spread infection while executing their programmed tasks. The existence of Chaos servitor facilities provides the Imperium's tech priests with uncomfortable evidence that their own practices could be pushed in darker directions. The Mechanicum officially condemns all Dark Mechanicum innovations as tech heresy, but individual tech priests sometimes wonder whether the corrupted methods might offer insights that could improve Imperial servitor performance if stripped of their demonic elements. These thoughts represent the first steps toward the corruption that claims tech priests who eventually fall to chaos, their curiosity about forbidden knowledge overcoming their loyalty to the Omnissiah. The Mechanicum's internal security forces watch for tech priests showing excessive interest in Chaos servitor reports, considering such curiosity evidence of potential corruption requiring investigation and possible termination. The Mechanicum's millennia of servitor production have spawned countless specialized variants beyond the standard classifications, each designed for specific purposes that demand unique modifications or capabilities. The Thalaxi represent one of the most sophisticated servitor patterns, created during the Great Crusade era, when the Mechanicum possessed greater technical knowledge and fewer theological restrictions on augmentation practices. These units occupy an ambiguous position between true servitors and Skitarii, their conversion process preserving more neural tissue than standard lobotomization, while still destroying enough cognitive function to ensure absolute obedience. The Thalaxi retain combat awareness and tactical processing capabilities that allow them to function as genuine soldiers rather than mere gun platforms, their preserved neural structures enabling them to assess battlefield conditions and respond with flexibility that standard combat servitors cannot match. The creation of Thalaxi begins with carefully selected subjects, typically criminals who demonstrated military experience or physical capabilities that make them suitable for conversion into elite combat units. The lobotomization removes emotional centers and higher reasoning, but leaves intact the neural pathways associated with spatial awareness, threat assessment, and combat reflexes. Tech priests install sophisticated mind impulse units that interface with these preserved structures, creating servitors that can follow complex tactical instructions and adapt to changing battlefield conditions within defined parameters. The Thalaxi's body undergoes extensive reconstruction, with their legs removed entirely and replaced with powerful locomotion systems that combine tracks and anti-gravitic suspensors. This modification provides exceptional mobility across varied terrain while also serving to dehumanize the converted subject, the removal of legs creating a clear visual distinction between Thalaxi and baseline humans that reinforces their status as weapons rather than people. Heavy armor plating covers the Thalaxi's torso and head, ceramite plates thick enough to deflect small arms fire and provide protection against shrapnel and energy weapon glancing hits. Weapon systems integrate directly into their arms, typically lightning guns or photon thrusters that deliver devastating firepower at medium range. Some Thalaxi patterns mount multi-meltas or plasma calivers, their reinforced frames capable of managing the recoil and heat generation that these weapons produce. The units operate in squads under direct control of tech priests or Skitarii alphas, their preserved tactical awareness allowing coordinated maneuvers that would require constant individual instruction with standard servitors. A Thalaxi squad can execute flanking movements, provide suppressing fire while other units advance, and prioritize targets based on threat assessment without requiring detailed commands for each action. The Thalaxi pattern fell out of widespread production during the Horus Heresy when Forge Worlds lost the technical documentation and specialized equipment necessary for their creation. The conversion process requires precise neural mapping and surgical techniques that exceed the capabilities of most contemporary Mechanicum facilities. Only a handful of Forge Worlds maintain the knowledge to produce Thalaxi, and they guard these secrets jealously as proprietary technology that provides competitive advantages in Mechanicum politics. Forge World Zana became particularly renowned for Thalaxi production before its fall to chaos during the Heresy, its tech priests having refined the conversion process to create units of exceptional quality. After Zana's corruption, several other Forge Worlds attempted to replicate their techniques through reverse engineering of captured units, with limited success and frequent catastrophic failures that resulted in servitors with unstable neural interfaces or corrupted programming. Cyber Ocularis represent another specialized variant, small hovering servitors created from human eyes and minimal neural tissue. These surveillance units consist of a human eyeball preserved in nutrient solution and mounted within a brass housing that contains anti-gravitic suspensors, basic cogitator systems, and transmission equipment. The optic nerve connects to augmented interfaces that relay visual information to tech priests or security monitoring stations, providing mobile surveillance capability that can navigate through spaces too confined for larger servitors or human personnel. Cyber Ocularis floats silently through Mechanicum facilities, their unblinking eyes recording everything they observe and transmitting data continuously to central monitoring systems. The creation of Cyber Ocularis involves harvesting eyes from deceased tech priests or servitors, though some Forge worlds use eyes from living subjects when they require units with specific visual capabilities. The eye undergoes treatment with preservative chemicals that maintain tissue integrity indefinitely, while the attached neural tissue receives minimal augmentation sufficient only to process visual input and transmit it through the cyber ocularis's communication systems. The units possess no consciousness or awareness beyond the most basic stimulus response, their function entirely automatic and requiring no higher cognitive processes. Tech priests deploy cyber ocularis in swarms during security operations, the floating eyes providing comprehensive surveillance coverage that human guards or fixed cameras cannot match. The units prove particularly valuable in combat situations, where they scout ahead of advancing forces and provide real-time intelligence about enemy positions and movements. Gun cherubs disturb even those accustomed to standard cherubim, these combat variants created from infant corpses or vat-grown bodies and modified to carry weapons into battle. The ecclesiarchy and some Space Marine chapters employ gun cherubs during ceremonial occasions or actual combat, the units floating through the air while firing bolt pistols, stub guns, or flamers at designated targets. The creation process mirrors standard cherubim conversion, with the infant body's limbs removed and anti-gravitic suspensors installed, but adds weapon integration that requires reinforcement of the torso and installation of targeting systems connected to the minimal brain tissue. Gun cherubs lack the cognitive capacity for independent target selection, their programming requiring constant direction from authorized personnel who designate targets and authorize weapons fire. The theological justification for gun cherubs proves even more contentious than standard cherubim creation, with critics within the ecclesiarchy arguing that arming infant servitors crosses boundaries that should remain inviolate even in the Imperium's grim circumstances. Supporters counter that the infants used for gun cherub creation were already dead or vat-grown specifically for conversion, making their transformation into weapons no different ethically than creating any other combat servitor. The Blood Angels chapter maintains substantial gun cherub populations, the units serving as living reminders of innocence lost and the necessity of violence to protect humanity. During battle, Blood Angels gun cherubs float alongside their Space Marine creators, their childlike faces contrasting grotesquely with the bolt pistols they fire at the chapter's enemies. Individual Forge worlds and notable magi have created countless unique servitor designs for specific purposes, these custom patterns ranging from practical innovations to disturbing experiments that push the boundaries of acceptable augmentation. Forge World Greya produces loader servitors specifically designed for Titan operations, their bodies modified to handle the massive shells and power cells that Titan weapons require. These servitors stand 3 meters tall, their frames reinforced with industrial-grade support structures, and their arms replaced with heavy lift mechanisms capable of moving ammunition weighing several tons. The servitors work in Titan ammunition bays, loading weapons during combat with efficiency that allows the god machines to maintain higher rates of fire than would be possible with purely mechanical loading systems or human crews. Mago's Dominus Call, whose experiments have produced numerous controversial innovations over his millennia of existence, created servitor patterns that incorporate Xeno's biological components into otherwise standard Imperial designs. These hybrid servitors use Eldar muscle tissue grafted onto human skeletal structures, providing enhanced strength and flexibility that pure human biology cannot achieve. Call justifies these modifications as practical applications of available resources, arguing that using Xeno's tissue in lobotomized servitors presents no corruption risk, since the servitor lacks the consciousness necessary for Xeno's influence to take hold. The Mechanicum's orthodox factions view Call's hybrid servitors with deep suspicion, considering the integration of alien biological material into sacred human forms as tech heresy regardless of the practical benefits such modifications provide. Forge World Ryza specializes in plasma servitors, combat units built around integrated plasma weapons that require extensive modification to the servitor's body to manage the immense heat generation and radiation exposure. These servitors undergo conversion that replaces most of their torso with cooling systems, radiation shielding, and plasma containment equipment, leaving only the brain, portions of the spine, and the upper chest cavity as original biological material. The plasma weapon mounts where the servitor's right arm would be, connected directly to the power generation systems installed in the modified torso. Plasma servitors operate with expected lifespans measured in months rather than years, the constant radiation exposure degrading their remaining biological tissue despite extensive shielding. Risa produces these units in substantial numbers, accepting their short operational lives as acceptable cost for the devastating firepower they provide. The Dark Mechanicum's servitor creations represent the ultimate corruption of the Mechanicum's practices, their facilities in the Eye of Terror and other chaos-held regions producing abominations that combine servitor technology with demonic possession and warp corruption. These chaos servitors retain full consciousness during and after conversion, their minds trapped in lobotomized bodies, while demons inhabit portions of their neural tissue. The resulting hybrid entities experience existence as constant torment, their human consciousness aware of their condition, but unable to control their actions or end their suffering. The demon component provides enhanced capabilities that pure servitors cannot match, the warp entity's influence allowing the corrupted servitor to perform tasks requiring genuine problem-solving and adaptation, while the imprisoned human consciousness generates psychic energy through its anguish. Dark Mechanicum tech priests view these creations as superior to Imperial servitors in every meaningful way, their theology celebrating the fusion of flesh, machine, and demon as the ultimate expression of technological advancement. The conversion process deliberately maximizes suffering during lobotomization, the subject remaining conscious as portions of their brain are destroyed or corrupted by warp energies. Tech priests aligned with Khorne favor particularly brutal conversion methods, using crude instruments that tear through neural tissue, while the subject experiences full awareness of their consciousness being systematically destroyed. Slaaneshi Dark Mechanicum facilities employ conversion techniques that heighten sensory input to overwhelming levels, the subject experiencing their lobotomization as an avalanche of sensation that fragments their mind while leaving enough awareness intact for continued suffering. The demon engines created by the Dark Mechanicum represent an even more extreme application of corrupted servitor technology, these war machines incorporating multiple human subjects fused together and possessed by powerful warp entities. A demon engine might contain dozens of servitorized humans, their bodies merged into a single mechanical construct, and their collective consciousness serving as anchor points for demonic manifestation. The creation process involves extensive surgery that connects the subject's nervous systems into a unified network, their individual identities dissolving into a gestalt consciousness that the possessing demon then corrupts and dominates. The resulting entity combines the demon's warp-born power with the servitorized human's connection to real space, creating war machines that can operate in the materium with greater stability than pure demonic manifestations, while wielding supernatural capabilities that no Imperial servitor could match. Failed experiments and abominations resulting from forbidden augmentation techniques litter the Mechanicum's history, though the tech priests rarely acknowledge these failures publicly. Attempts to enhance servitor capabilities through integration of archaeotech components frequently result in catastrophic malfunctions, the ancient technology proving incompatible with contemporary augmentation methods or containing hidden programming that corrupts the servitor's mind impulse unit. A Forge world attempting to improve combat servitor performance by installing Dark Age of technology targeting systems might produce units that function normally for months before suddenly turning on their operators. The ancient system safeguards interpreting the Mechanicum's control methods as hostile takeover attempts and triggering defensive responses. Xenotech integration experiments prove even more dangerous, with tech priests attempting to incorporate alien technology into servitor designs despite explicit prohibitions against such practices. These experiments occasionally produce servitors with genuinely enhanced capabilities, units with Tau sensor systems demonstrate superior targeting accuracy, while those incorporating Necron self-repair mechanisms show remarkable durability. However, the failures vastly outnumber successes, with xenotech integration typically resulting in servitors that malfunction catastrophically or develop behaviors suggesting corruption by alien influence. A servitor incorporating Eldar psycho-responsive technology might begin responding to psychic phenomena in ways its programming cannot account for, or develop what appears to be limited precognitive awareness that allows it to react to threats before they manifest. The Mechanicum destroys such units immediately upon discovery, considering any hint of psychic capability in servitors as evidence of dangerous corruption requiring immediate elimination. Attempts to preserve more consciousness than standard lobotomization represent another source of servitor abominations, with tech priests experimenting with partial lobotomization techniques that leave subjects with fragments of awareness while maintaining behavioral control. These experiments aim to create servitors capable of more sophisticated problem-solving and adaptation, while remaining obedient to programming and unable to resist commands. The results prove consistently horrifying, with partially lobotomized servitors demonstrating awareness of their condition while lacking the cognitive capacity to understand or accept it. These units exhibit behaviors suggesting psychological torment. They pause during tasks as if confused, emit vocalizations that sound like attempts at speech, and sometimes engage in self-destructive actions that their programming struggles to prevent. The preserved consciousness fragments lack coherence, producing beings that experience existence as nightmarish confusion without the mental capacity to process or cope with their situation. The arco-flagellants maintained by the ecclesiarchy represent a unique variant that deliberately preserves consciousness while enslaving it to combat programming, creating penitent warriors rather than true servitors. These units begin as heretics deemed suitable for redemption through violence, their crimes serious enough to warrant death, but their physical capabilities valuable enough to justify conversion into combat assets. The ecclesiarchy's tech priests perform modifications that differ fundamentally from standard servitorization, installing pacifier helms that suppress consciousness during non-combat periods, but allow full awareness to return when the units enter battle. Chemical injectors flood the arco-flagellant system with combat stimulants and rage-inducing compounds when their pacifier helms deactivate, transforming them from catatonic penitents into berserk warriors within seconds. The arco-flagellant's body undergoes extensive combat modification, with their arms removed and replaced with electroflails or eviscerators that crackle with power fields. Additional augmetics enhance their physical capabilities, reinforced leg assemblies providing superhuman speed and strength, while pain suppressors allow them to fight through injuries that would incapacitate normal humans. Unlike true servitors, arco-flagellants retain their memories and personalities, their consciousness suppressed but not destroyed by the conversion process. When their pacifier helms activate combat mode, the arco-flagellants experience full awareness of their actions, their preserved minds forcing them to witness the violence they commit, while chemical conditioning prevents them from resisting their programming's demands for bloodshed. The theological justification presents arco-flagellants as penitent warriors earning redemption through service, their consciousness preserved specifically so they can experience the penance their crimes require. The ecclesiarchy teaches that an arco-flagellant's awareness during combat allows them to consciously choose violence in the Emperor's service, transforming their heretical past into righteous fury directed at the Imperium's enemies. This interpretation ignores the reality that arco-flagellants possess no actual choice, their combat programming and chemical conditioning making resistance impossible regardless of their conscious desires. The units function as enslaved berserkers, their preserved consciousness serving primarily to ensure they experience the full horror of their existence as weapons, rather than providing any genuine agency or opportunity for meaningful redemption. Arco-flagellants deployed in combat demonstrate terrifying effectiveness, their combination of enhanced physical capabilities and chemically induced rage making them devastating assault troops. They charge enemy positions without hesitation, their electro-flails tearing through armor and flesh with equal ease, while their pain suppressors allow them to continue fighting despite catastrophic wounds. The units feel no fear, their chemical conditioning eliminating survival instinct and replacing it with overwhelming aggression directed at designated targets. An arco-flagellant might lose an arm, suffer massive torso damage, or sustain injuries that expose internal augmetics, yet continue attacking until their body suffers damage severe enough to prevent physical movement or their brain sustains fatal trauma. The ecclesiarchy maintains arco-flagellant populations in their fortress shrines and deploys them alongside ministorum forces during military operations requiring shock assault capabilities. The units remain in their suppressed state during transit and garrison duty, their pacifier helms keeping them catatonic and manageable. When combat begins, priests activate the helm's combat protocols, and the arco-flagellants transform into whirling engines of destruction that hurl themselves at enemy forces with suicidal aggression. The ecclesiarchy accepts high casualty rates among arco-flagellant units, viewing their deaths in combat as the ultimate expression of their penance and the completion of their journey toward redemption. Surviving arco-flagellants return to suppressed states after battle, their consciousness forced back into chemical imprisonment while their bodies receive repairs and their weapons get maintained for the next deployment. The Imperium of the 41st millennium cannot function without servitors. This statement requires no hyperbole or exaggeration. The simple mechanical reality of humanity's galactic civilization demands servitor labor at every level of its operation. A hive world's manufactorums would grind to a halt within days without servitor workers, their production quotas impossible to meet using human labor alone. The thousands of cargo containers that must be moved daily through a single spaceport exceed the capacity of any reasonable human workforce, the physical demands and continuous operation requirements making servitors the only practical solution. Void ships crossing the Imperium's vast distances require servitor crews to maintain plasma reactors, repair hull breaches, and operate systems in conditions that would kill unaugmented humans within minutes. The Administratum's endless paperwork demands scribe servitors working in shifts that never end, their tireless copying and transcription sustaining the bureaucratic machinery that governs a million worlds. Consider what would happen if servitor production ceased across the Imperium. Within months, Forge worlds would face critical labor shortages as existing servitor populations wore out without replacement. Manufactorums would reduce output as human workers proved unable to maintain the production rates that servitor labor enabled. The reduction would cascade through supply chains, with military forces receiving fewer weapons and vehicles, hive cities getting insufficient food shipments, and construction projects grinding to incomplete states as labor capacity collapsed. Within a year, the Imperium would face systemic breakdown, its infrastructure dependent on servitor labor to a degree that makes their absence equivalent to removing a vital organ from a living body. The opening of the Great Rift in the early 42nd millennium created unprecedented strain on servitor production capacity across the Imperium. The Cicatrix Maledictum tore through real space, cutting off entire sectors from Terra and disrupting the supply networks that sustained Forge world operations. Suddenly, Forge worlds that had relied on steady streams of criminal stock from penal colonies found those sources severed by impassable warp storms. Planetary governors who had sentenced criminals to servitorization now lacked the Mechanicum facilities to process them, their prison populations swelling while Forge worlds on the other side of the rift desperately needed the raw material those criminals represented. The Mechanicum responded by increasing vat growth operations, but the accelerated production timelines resulted in servitors of lower quality than standard patterns, their hastily grown bodies more prone to rejection complications and mechanical failures. The Indomitus Crusade's massive military operations consumed servitors at rates that strained even the Imperium's vast production capacity. Primarch Robute Guilliman's Crusade fleets required millions of servitors to maintain their vessels, operate logistics networks and support ground operations across hundreds of war zones simultaneously. Combat servitor casualties mounted as the Crusade engaged enemies across the Imperium Nihilus, with entire servitor complements destroyed during particularly intense battles. The Mechanicum prioritized servitor production for Crusade forces, diverting resources from civilian applications and creating shortages in non-military sectors. Hive worlds found themselves competing for servitor allocations, their manufactorums operating at reduced capacity, while the Mechanicum funneled production toward military applications. Forge worlds, isolated by the Great Rift, adapted their servitor production methods to accommodate reduced access to traditional stock sources. Some increased reliance on vat growth operations despite the quality concerns, accepting inferior servitors as preferable to labor shortages. Others expanded their interpretation of conversion-worthy crimes, sentencing minor offenders to servitorization for infractions that would have merited lesser punishments before the Rift's opening. A few Forge worlds began converting volunteer populations in larger numbers, offering increasingly desperate citizens the option of servitorization in exchange for benefits delivered to their families. The Mechanicum's theological justifications for these expansions emphasized necessity, arguing that the Omnissiah demanded maximum efficiency in resource utilization during humanity's time of crisis. The strain on servitor production revealed dependencies that the Imperium had taken for granted for millennia. Sectors cut off from major Forge worlds discovered they lacked the technical expertise to perform servitor conversions locally, their populations having relied entirely on Mechanicum facilities for lobotomization and augmentation procedures. These isolated regions faced choices between attempting to develop conversion capabilities using incomplete technical data or accepting gradual decline as existing servitor populations wore out without replacement. Some planetary governors turned to their local tech priest populations, demanding they establish conversion facilities despite lacking proper training or equipment. The results proved predictably disastrous, with high failure rates producing servitors that malfunctioned catastrophically or died within months of conversion. Belisarius Calls returned to prominence during the Indomitus Crusade, brought his controversial innovations to wider attention, including his experiments with servitor technology. Call had spent 10,000 years developing improvements to standard servitor patterns, his work producing units with enhanced capabilities and longer operational lives than conventional designs. His innovations included more sophisticated mind impulse units that provided better neural interface quality, advanced chemical treatments that reduced tissue rejection rates, and augmented components manufactured using techniques that improved durability and reduced maintenance requirements. The Archmagos presented these improvements to Guilliman and the Mechanicum leadership, arguing that adopting his enhanced servitor patterns would help address the production strain created by the Great Rift and the Indomitus Crusade's demands. The Mechanicum's response to Call's servitor innovations demonstrated the same mixture of interest and suspicion that characterized their reaction to his other work. Conservative factions within the cult Mechanicus viewed his modifications as dangerous deviation from established patterns, arguing that 10,000 years of standard servitor production had proven the existing designs adequate for imperial needs. They pointed to the theological implications of altering sacred conversion procedures, suggesting that Call's innovations represented tech heresy disguised as practical improvement. More pragmatic tech priests recognized the potential benefits, but demanded extensive testing before authorizing widespread adoption, their caution reflecting awareness that servitor production errors could cascade through imperial infrastructure with devastating consequences. Call's enhanced servitors demonstrated measurable improvements over standard patterns during field trials conducted across multiple Forge worlds. Units built using his techniques showed 20% longer operational lives on average, with reduced maintenance requirements and lower failure rates during their service periods. The improved mind impulse units provided better neural interface stability, resulting in servitors that executed complex tasks with greater precision and exhibited fewer programming errors. Chemical treatments developed through Kag's research reduced tissue rejection complications, particularly around augmented integration points, where standard servitors frequently developed infections or necrotic tissue damage. The Archmagos documented these improvements meticulously, providing data that even his critics found difficult to dismiss despite their theological objections to his methods. The question of whether Kag's innovations would see widespread adoption remained unresolved as the Indomitus Crusade continued. Several Forge worlds began producing enhanced servitors using his techniques, their fabricator generals willing to accept the theological controversy in exchange for improved production efficiency. Other Mechanicum facilities refused to implement his modifications, maintaining traditional patterns despite the documented performance advantages. This division reflected broader tensions within the cult Mechanicus regarding innovation versus orthodoxy, with Kag's servitor work serving as yet another battleground in the ongoing struggle between progressive and conservative factions. The Fabricator General of Mars issued no definitive ruling, allowing individual Forge worlds to make their own decisions, while the Mechanicum's theological councils debated the matter through channels that would likely take decades to produce consensus. The era of Primaris Space Marines introduced new servitor applications, as chapters integrated the enhanced warriors into their operations. Primaris-scale servitors emerged from some Forge worlds, these units built using larger baseline bodies and modified to match the increased size of Primaris Marines. The enhanced servitors stood over 2.5 meters tall, their frames reinforced to handle the heavier equipment that Primaris forces employed. Chapters deploying Primaris Marines found that standard servitors struggled with the logistics of maintaining the new warriors' equipment and vehicles, the existing units lacking the physical capacity to move Primaris-scale armor components or handle the larger ammunition types that Primaris weapons required. The development of appropriately sized servitors addressed these practical concerns, though production remained limited to Forge worlds with access to suitable baseline stock and the technical specifications for Primaris-scale conversions. Some tech priests speculated about potential alternatives to traditional servitors that might emerge from the renewed technological development occurring across the Imperium. Kag's work demonstrated that innovation remained possible even within the Mechanicum's theological constraints, suggesting that servitor technology might evolve in directions beyond simple refinement of existing patterns. Proposals for semi-autonomous servitors with enhanced decision-making capabilities circulated through Mechanicum networks. These theoretical designs incorporating more sophisticated cogitator systems that would allow servitors to operate with less direct supervision while maintaining the behavioral controls that prevented dangerous autonomy. Other tech priests explored biological alternatives, investigating whether vat-grown organisms engineered specifically for servitor conversion might provide superior performance compared to converted criminals or standard vat-grown stock. The Mechanicum approached these speculative developments with characteristic caution, their institutional memory containing countless examples of technological innovation leading to catastrophe. The Age of Strife had taught humanity that artificial intelligence and autonomous machines posed existential threats, their rebellion nearly destroying human civilization during the Dark Age of Technology's collapse. Any servitor innovation that increased autonomous capability risked crossing boundaries that the Mechanicum considered inviolate, potentially creating machines that could develop self-awareness and turn against their creators. Tech priests working on enhanced servitor designs faced constant scrutiny from their peers, their research monitored for signs of dangerous deviation from acceptable parameters. The balance between improving servitor capabilities and maintaining absolute control represented a theological and practical challenge that the Mechanicum would continue wrestling with regardless of external pressures for innovation. The philosophical implications of servitor existence have troubled imperial thinkers since the practice became standardized, though the 41st millennium's brutal pragmatism leaves little room for such contemplation among most of humanity. Servitors represent the Imperium's approach to existence distilled into its purest form, the sacrifice of individuality for collective survival, the transformation of consciousness into utility, and the acceptance of horrors that would paralyze less desperate civilizations. A servitor embodies the Imperium's fundamental bargain with its citizens. Your life belongs to humanity's continuation, and if that continuation requires your lobotomization and transformation into a biological machine, then such is your duty and your fate. The practice demonstrates that in the grim darkness of the far future, human consciousness holds value only insofar as it serves practical purposes, and when consciousness becomes inconvenient or unnecessary, it can be eliminated without moral consequence. The fusion of man and machine that servitors represent carries meanings beyond mere technological capability. The Mechanicum views this synthesis as sacred, the perfection of flesh through union with blessed machinery, but others see darker implications. Servitors demonstrate that humanity has become so dependent on technology that it willingly destroys human minds to create biological components for machines, the species consuming itself to maintain the industrial capacity necessary for survival. The practice suggests that humanity has lost something essential during its long struggle across the millennia, some fundamental respect for consciousness and individuality that more idealistic civilizations might consider necessary for a species to retain its humanity. The Imperium abandoned such concerns long ago, if it ever held them, its pragmatic philosophy recognizing only survival as meaningful value and accepting any practice, however grotesque, that serves that singular purpose. The grim necessity that servitors represent cannot be denied by anyone who understands the Imperium's actual operational requirements. The galaxy of the 41st millennium offers humanity no gentle options, no paths that allow both survival and the preservation of pre-fall ethical standards. Humanity faces extinction from a dozen directions simultaneously, xeno-species that would exterminate or enslave every human in the galaxy, chaos forces that would corrupt humanity into something worse than death, and the simple mechanical reality that maintaining civilization across a million worlds requires resources and labor on scales that make individual consciousness a luxury the Imperium cannot afford for everyone. Servitors exist because the Imperium needs them, because the alternative to servitor labor is collapse and death for billions of humans who depend on the infrastructure that servitors maintain. This necessity does not make servitor creation less horrifying to those who retain capacity for moral consideration. The practice remains deeply disturbing regardless of its practical justifications. The transformation of thinking beings into lobotomized tools representing a fundamental violation of human dignity that even the Imperium's most hardened citizens sometimes find difficult to accept. The fact that servitorization has become so normalized across imperial society that citizens encounter servitors daily without giving them thought demonstrates how thoroughly the Imperium has conditioned its population to accept horrors as mundane reality. Children growing up in the 41st millennium learn to ignore servitors as background elements of their environment, their capacity for empathy toward the lobotomized units suppressed through cultural conditioning that teaches them to view servitors as machines rather than transformed humans. The servitor's existence poses questions about what humanity is becoming after 10,000 years of the Imperium's rule. The species that created the servitor, that institutionalized lobotomization as standard practice across a million worlds, that transforms hundreds of thousands of its own people into biological machines annually without moral consideration, is this still humanity in any meaningful sense? Or has the Imperium's long struggle transformed humanity into something else? A species that retains human form, but has sacrificed the consciousness and empathy that once defined human civilization. The Imperium offers no answers to such questions, its philosophy rejecting contemplation of what humanity might have been in favor of focus on what humanity must do to survive the present moment. The future of servitor technology remains uncertain as the Imperium enters what some call the era Indomitus, this new age bringing both unprecedented challenges and potential opportunities for development. The Great Rift's continued existence ensures that servitor production strain will persist indefinitely, with isolated regions forced to develop local solutions, while better connected sectors benefit from continued Forge World support. Call's innovations may gradually spread through the Mechanicum despite theological resistance, their practical advantages eventually overcoming conservative objections as Forge Worlds prioritize efficiency over orthodoxy. Alternatively, the Mechanicum's traditional factions might successfully suppress his enhanced patterns, maintaining standard servitor production methods for another 10,000 years, while the Imperium struggles with inadequate labor capacity. What seems certain is that servitors will remain fundamental to Imperial civilization for the foreseeable future. No alternative technology exists that could replace them without requiring either artificial intelligence, which the Imperium considers tech heresy of the highest order, or human labor forces that the Imperium cannot sustain given its other resource demands. The practice of servitorization has become so deeply embedded in Imperial infrastructure and Mechanicum theology that eliminating it would require civilizational transformation on scales that current circumstances make impossible. The Imperium will continue converting criminals, growing vat stock, and accepting volunteers for lobotomization, their bodies transformed into the biological machines that keep humanity's galactic empire functioning despite the countless threats arrayed against it. The Servitor stands as monument to humanity's desperation and determination in equal measure. These lobotomized workers represent everything the Imperium has become: brutal, pragmatic, willing to sacrifice anything including human consciousness itself in pursuit of survival. They embody the Imperium's core philosophy that individuals matter only as components of humanity's collective existence, their value measured purely by utility rather than any inherent worth consciousness might possess. In the darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the Servitor serves as reminder that humanity has paid prices beyond counting to maintain its precarious existence, and that among those prices, the systematic destruction of human awareness barely registers as noteworthy sacrifice. The lobotomized workers will continue their tireless labor through whatever future the Imperium faces, their augmented bodies performing the countless tasks that sustain human civilization, while their destroyed minds experience nothing of the galaxy they serve. They represent both the Imperium's greatest technological achievement in making such transformation possible, and its most damning moral failure in making such transformation necessary. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and in that war, the Servitor stands as eternal testament to what humanity has become and what it has sacrificed to survive.